Hello everyone, this is the story of what if Naruto pushes Hinata past her limits in bed. The sun shone brightly high in the cloudless sky, affording the landscape below all of the sun's warmth. On the ground below, a gentle breeze swept through a village situated in the middle of a large forest and a wedge of mountain. With so many trees, the sound of leaves rustling in the blowing wind rung clearly for miles, and provided a constant background noise to the daily life in the village. Konohagakure, the capital ninja village of Fire Country, was one of the most populated cities on the entire continent. Even as densely populated as the village was, the outskirts of the walled-in congregation held almost no population. About the only things that really exist. In the outlying areas were many numerous training grounds of different sizes and purpose. One member of the village spent an inordinate amount of time in these areas training himself to exhaustion. At the moment, however, he wasn't training at all. Rather, he simply lay in the grass on the fringe of one of the grounds. The boy, only age 13, was near passed out from exhaustion. His normally disheveled head of bright blonde hair now lay damp with sweat over his cerulean eyes. The most notable feature of his face was not the striking color of his eyes, but the 6 identical whisker-shaped birthmarks that marred his cheeks. The fact that they were obviously not normal human characteristics led to the draw they had on people's eyes. His predominantly orange jacket lay open, exposing his black fishnet shirt to the sun. His matching orange pants were slightly marred with various grass stains he had received from training almost all through the day. His blue sandals suffered a similar fate. Naruto's right hand sported countless small puncture marks that looked like they were made by teeth, the result of trying out the limits of his Kichio's jutsu. The day had been spent trying out the depths of the summoning technique taught to him by his most recent teacher. He was now finding out the art of summoning ninja toads was a lot more complicated than he had originally thought. His perverted teacher had summoned various toads during the short time he had known him for many different tasks, so it stood to reason that he should have been able to do the same. After many failed attempts, Naruto had decided that it was in character for Jiraiya to have left out the finer points. He attempted it regardless, using chakra differently each time to see what results he could get. Thanks to this trial and error, Naruto now had a new nightmare. Just yesterday he had pumped a lot of chakra into the summoning, but his mind started to wander when he should have been thinking about his chakra control. What he unwittingly summoned was not a veteran toad ninja as he had hoped, but over 1,000 smoke bomb-sized toad eggs. They quickly lost their cohesion and fell over him in a squiggly mass. It had been more than an hour before they ate up the chakra he had used to summon them. He shuddered as he lay there, remembering the squishy horror. It was very frustrating, but he usually would have had a brilliant idea strike him by this point. Something that would bring everything into focus and grant him insight into his training. The lack of such a thing now was frustrating. With warning, the light filtering through his bangs was denied to him. "Hey, Naruto," a voice came from somewhere in front of him. He opened his eyes and mustered the energy to brush away his bangs only to see Shikamaru standing before him. The newest Konoha Chunin was one of many people as of late he could call friend. Shikamaru always had a look on his face that could contain apathy, boredom, or even sleepiness. Sometimes he pulled off a look that mixed all three. Like his expressions, Shikamaru's appearance hadn't changed much at all since leaving the genin ranks. His jet black hair was still tied up into a tight topknot that arrayed all his hair into a thick column. He still wore the same gray t-shirt and long black shorts. The only change to his wardrobe was the addition of the standard issue flak jacket. This extra addition to his wardrobe was essentially a badge of rank as a chunin, but also offered a good deal of protection. Beside the professionally bored boy stood another one of his new friends. Stood was not a term which usually applied to the energetic, fuzzy brows, as Naruto was often wont to call him. Rock Lee was a genin a year older than either of them and belonged to the strongest rookie cell. Naruto wouldn't hesitate to say that Lee was pretty much one of the weirdest guys he had ever met. Upon meeting him for the first time, a person's gaze was always drawn to the outrageous full-body green spandex outfit he wore before they noticed anything else. Part of its oddity was that it gave the illusion of looking simpler than it actually was. Other than the standard sandals, kunai pouch, and forehead protector, he, for some reason, wore on his waist. It was a pretty simple outfit as far as ninja equipment went. His outfit was finished off by some bandages wrapped around his wrists and forearms. And a pair of large orange shin socks. If anything about him could compete with his outrageous outfit, it would have to be his face. His hairstyle made it look like someone had just stuck a bowl on top of his head and cut around the rim. Two completely black orbs stared out of abnormally large round eyes, completing the effect. All in all, Lee struck an odd figure. Huh, Shikamaru, what did you want? Having suddenly had activity forced back on him, Naruto could gradually feel more and more of his strength returning. Greetings, Naruto-kun. We bring orders from Hokage-sama for you to return with us to her office. Lee put forth a hand to help out the prone Naruto. Naruto managed to prop himself up on his elbows before proceeding to negotiate himself into a kneeling position. What does Oba-chan want with me now? He had already used up all but a fraction of his personal chakra and his body ached from the lack of it. He clasped the preferred arm gratefully with his own. The Hokage asked for me to bring you and Rock Lee to her for a meeting. That's for your ears only. I'm just a courier. Shikamaru paused as Lee steadied Naruto, the latter grinning with that usual stupid grin of his. Troublesome, he added as an afterthought. Naruto looked questioningly at the Genin and Chunin before him. Why both Rock Lee and me? He paused for a moment, then, is it a mission? I'm supposed to be leaving soon with Ero Sennin for a whole bunch of training soon. If it's a quick one, I guess I could squeeze it in. That big dumb grin of his was readily available once again. He acted like she would have to beg to get him to do a mission. Shikamaru winced at Naruto's sloppy way of speaking. You'll find out when we get there. Try not to let your ego get the best of you. With that, the shadow user turned and began making his way past the tree line towards Konoha. Rock Lee and Naruto quickly moved to follow him, the blonde almost tripping over himself in the process. While the three continued to make their way to the Hokage Tower, Tsunade was already entertaining another guest. She was glad at least someone had the propriety to be on time when she asked for them. It was a rather nice day and the windows to her office were thrown open, letting the soothing scent of the spring air waft in on the day's cool breeze. The sunlight streamed through T.H.'s open windows and illuminated all of the Hokage's office in an affable light. The girl that sat in one of the large chairs set before her seemed to always be nervous or unsure about something as far as Tsunade could tell. Everything about the girl seemed to suggest she was just barely resisting the urge to hide. It always surprised her how much like the rest of her clan the girl was not. Her blue-black hair framed her face perfectly on all sides. The sides of her bangs came down to her neck and the hair at the nape of her neck came up to meet the hair from the top of her head in a point in back. Her eyes were the biggest curiosity about her. The two milky white orbs seemed to suggest she was blind, but it was readily obvious she could see quite well. Unlike her classically pretty face, her outfit was decidedly unfeminine and overly concealing. She wore a creamy tan-colored jacket a little too large for her with curious symbols on the shoulders and a fuzzy hem at the bottom. In yet another oddity, her forehead protector rested around her neck after the fashion of a loose choker. The last piece of her ensemble was filled out by standard blue shin-length pants and the standard issue sandals. Tsunade also noted that if her fingers weren't twiddling together nervously, she was looking around the office with a slight look of apprehension. The Hokage could only imagine how much harder it would have been to get Hyuga Hinata for the mission she had planned if the girl was still a member of the Hyuga's main house. As it stood, she could only guess why Hiashi, Hinata's father and head of the Hyuga clan, was allowing this, considering how protective they were of their bloodline. She didn't give it too much thought, however. What happens in the clan stays in the clan was an old adage for most of Konoha's clans. Tsunade and Hinata were the only two in the room at the moment. Her trusted friend and aide Shizune, niece to a man she loved long ago, was not here. She was currently on a mission in Omegakure, acting as one of the liaisons for the upcoming Chunin exam to be held there. Not wanting to unduly stress Hinata out, Tsunade let the silence continue as they waited for the last arrivals. The arrivals in question made quick progress through the village towards the Hokage Tower. Usually the rooftops gave access to speedy travel for ninjas. Construction on various buildings still being conducted after the recent battles made that a hazard now, however. That only left more normal means of transportation. Many different ninja and citizens clogged the streets. They know W walked on with their various comings and goings. The many-colored buildings that made up the heart of the village had never been arranged in any specific order, making navigation difficult for all but those who had grown up there. They had grown up there, so they easily made their way through the throng of foot traffic with a practiced knowledge of the village's layout. The red-roofed building, with the kanji for fire emblazoned at the top, was one of the largest structures in the village, as well it should be since it was the cornerstone for Konoha's ninja force. The three walked through the open doors and were immediately greeted by someone they recognized as an examiner from the Chunin exam. Higane Katetsu was indeed involved in the Chunin exam. He, along with his partner Kamizuki Zumo, had administered a pre-exam test to all applicants. Katetsu wore an administrator's uniform, looking somehow out of place on him. His hair was even wilder and unkempt than Naruto's own, and for S. own reason he had a bandage that stretched over the middle of his face. He motioned for the new arrivals to follow him. "Allow me to take you to the Hokage's office." "Hey, you shouldn't have been late." Naruto at least didn't need an elaboration on why they should have been punctual. Most likely he'd get blamed for it anyway. They fell in behind the administrator and followed him to their destination. Naruto had memorized the way a long time ago, but he could see that the new Hokage had done some redecorating. The walls were now periodically covered with various potted plants and paintings of various scenes from around the land of fire. He guessed it was better than the previous Hokage's tastes. The small group of ninja eventually made it to the office door after many curving corridors and flights of stairs. Katetsu opened the simple door for the three younger ninja, motioning them inside once the door was open. As usual, the large desk at the far wall was covered in a myriad of books and scrolls. The only decorations on the walls were portraits of previous Hokages and two people Naruto could only assume were Naoki and Dan. Tsunade had told him about those two, her brother and her only love. Killed in defense of the village, believing in the dream of being Hokage. The odd-looking administrator shut the door behind them, and for a moment all was silent. The sunlight streaming through the window was bright on his face, yet Naruto could still make out Tsunade at her desk. He couldn't tell who, but another person sat in one of the comfy chairs facing the Hokage. Tsunade cut an odd figure for a Hokage. Despite being around 50 years old, she kept up the appearance of someone in their 20s. Her blonde hair had a very youthful sheen to it, and the style of two ponytails seemed to also detract from her age. She wore a simple green coat with the kanji for gambler on the back over a gray sashed top that seemed barely able to contain her sizable bust. She finished off her outfit with dark blue pants and matching heels. "I'm glad you three finally made it. Here I was hoping I'd get to send someone to go find you three." Tsunade glared at Shikamaru with a scary grin. Hey, I had to find him first. It was troublesome just trying to find him, you know." Shikamaru didn't look the least bit apologetic, just annoyed. Tsunade's look turned to one of understanding. "That's all right. You can go join your new cell now if you want." He gave a smart salute and turned to walk out the door. As he exited the room, he gave simple parting words to his friends. "See you guys later, I guess." As the door closed again, something occurred to Naruto. New cell. What's that about Oba-chan? He could only think that it had something to do with being promoted to Chunin. The sound of his voice, the person in the chair before him jumped slightly. Tsunade's eye twitched involuntarily at that name he still called her. She had grudgingly learned to just accept that as his way by this point. "Actually, that has something to do with what I've called you three in here for. It concerns the future of our village, so I want you all to listen closely to what I have to say." Her focus centered on the Hokage hopeful first. "Fist off, Naruto, I have to tell you that Jiraiya will not be able to take you on your training journey he had planned. I've given a mission that takes precedence over that." She left it at that and prepared herself to receive a very loud response. As if her subconscious prayers had been answered, Naruto was too dumbfounded by that simple statement to yell a response. What now?" He was hoping he had heard her wrong. She couldn't mean he was being denied the training he had been promised, did she? Tsunade held up a hand to forestall any more questions. "Hold your questions until I'm done for once, please. Now, Uzumaki Naruto, Rock Lee, and Hyuga Hinata, I am giving you an A-class mission of the utmost importance. Before I tell you the mission, let me first explain the circumstances behind the mission." "What, Hinata, where?" Tsunade had to resist the urge to yell at Naruto for interrupting her yet again. The introverted girl in K's. Chion shot out of her seat and spun to face the Naruto and Lee. She quickly entered a succession of small bows before she even met their eyes. Hello Naruto-kun, Lee-san. It's nice to see you well. She exited her bows doing her best to smile warmly despite herself. The energetic blonde hadn't seen Hinata in a while, since the Chunin exam if his memory served. She looked just how he remembered. Yet there seemed to be something different about her. After studying her for a few moments he figured out what it was. She stood straighter than she used to, and as she stood her feet now pointed outward. She looked like she was doing her best to look straight at him now instead of looking as if something was forcing her to look elsewhere. Her hands still fiddled with each other, but at least it wasn't to the degree they had before. He had to admit she actually looked somewhat cute without the dark and weird personality he had always seen with before the Chunin exam. Hey Hinata, what's up? Hey, you're looking good today. His casual words elicited a deep blush from Hinata, one which he was promptly oblivious to. I'm doing well Naruto-kun, thank you. She had instantly realized her blush and was doing everything she could to suppress it. She quickly turned around to face Tsunade so Naruto wouldn't see her embarrassment. It's good to see you are well Hinata-san. Lee gave her a thumbs up simply out of reflex. Tsunade decided to continue with what she had been saying before the interruption, and ignored the small exchange. She steepled her fingers on the desk, confident she could give her speech without any further interruptions. The future of our village isn't as certain as it once was. We still haven't completely recovered from the combined attack of the Sand and Sound villages. There just aren't enough Chunin and Junin left in the village to take on enough missions to monetarily support Konoha. My hand's been forced to strengthen the ranks of our usable ninja from any available source. It was hard to come to this decision, but here it is. The Hokage considered each of the three ninja before her with a criticizing eye. If she was going to be honest with herself, she would have to admit that this plan didn't sound as plausible as it should have to her. If there had been a safer and more efficient way to fortify their ranks, she would have taken almost anything over this. With a sigh, Tsunade continued. After consulting the village committee, I've decided to break up all current genin cells. All genins will then be reformed into new cells with new members. These cells will be led by ninja of my choice from outside the pool of Konoha's available Junin. Half the teams I'm forming will stay here in Konoha and continue to take on missions and train. The other half will be going to various locations and receive training there. Tsunade was very pleased to see Naruto was keeping his comments to himself so far, a miracle under any circumstance. Thus we come to the specifics of your mission. One of these new cells, Cell 15, will be made up of you three. This arrangement has been chosen because in the future many missions will require ninja who have never worked together before to perform as they would with their own teammates. All of your abilities and personalities clash with the others in some way. This is of course an attempt to get you used to working with diverse people. The three newly appointed teammates looked at each other. It looked like they had no choice but to get used to the idea of being teammates. This certainly wasn't what any of them had been expecting. Naruto, for one, really wasn't liking the idea of his training being cancelled, but his disappointment was lessened by the promises of some kind of training. As long as I can get strong enough to bring Sasuke back, then I don't care. The Hokage let this shock settle in before continuing. Your cell's specific mission is to travel to Sunagaku and not only train there but to do missions alongside the other genins there. It goes without saying that the main goal of this mission is to get all of our genins to the Chunin level as quickly as possible. The next Chunin exam will be held in Grass Country, and the one after that will be held in Rain Country. I expect you three will be able to elevate yourselves to Chunin status by that time. The Grass Country exam will be too soon for most cells, so I suggest you anticipate taking the Rain Country exam. Naruto liked the sound of that. Anything that got him closer to being a Chunin was okay with him. He still didn't know how he felt of suddenly being denied the pervert's training. At this point all he could hope for is that their Junin instructor would be able to teach him just as many useful things as Jiraiya could have. Hinata's thoughts were completely different from Naruto's. If what Tsunade said was true, then they would be gone from the village for a year at the very least. The T would mean being away from the feelings of exile she felt from her former family. That would mean being around Naruto constantly the whole time. This was something she hadn't dared hope was possible before she had woken up this morning. Rock Lee viewed this similarly to Naruto, a chance for diverse training and another shot at the Chunin exam. It would mean not being able to train with Guy-sensei for a long while. But that in itself was a form of training in his eyes. For reasons I can't reveal right now, the maximum time limit for this mission is set to 3 years. It is required that, the moment all 3 of you reach Chunin, you are to report back to Konoha immediately. That is all. I guess I'll take your questions now. Tsunade sighed deeply as she finished. The 3 new members of Cell 15 looked at each other questioningly. Ironically, the first one to speak up wasn't the outgoing Naruto, but the quiet Hinata. Hokage-sama, who exactly is our new instructor? To each of them it seemed like an important piece of information to leave out. Tsunade thought about it quickly, then figured she actually had left that out. Ah yes, about that. At this she smirked. 1am. Angst, you has already met your new instruct. Tsunade was interrupted by a sudden explosion of smoke that filled the space between Cell 15 and Tsunade's desk. The room was filled instantly with shamisen, Otsuzumi, and Hyoshigi music. A loud and annoying voice broke through the music. Hayu, here I am, MT. Myobokugama's outstanding holy master. Ah, shut up, you stupid Ero Sennin. Wait, what? Naruto suddenly realized what had happened. Ero Sennin. The legendary Sennin Jiraiya looked back at the group from the toad he was standing on, perched in a traditional kabuki pose. Ah, Naruto. He yelled with fake surprise. He took his time forming the seal for canceling a summon, intoning, cancel, as he did. Another burst of smoke filled the room as the toad disappeared. Jiraiya fell into a neat slouch at the absence of his perch. How's it going, kid? To the untrained eye it looked as if the toad hermit had pieced together his outfit from various costume shops during his travels. The centerpiece for his ensemble was an old-style olive ninja gi complete with underlying fishnet. He wore over that a red vest, and had a large scroll hanging off his back. His forehead protector, with the kanji for oil stamped in the middle, invoked the image of ogre's horns. Twin red, tear streaks on his face drew a lot of attention from any wrinkle line you might find there. To top off his weird ensemble, his gray hair, held in a spiky ponytail, almost touched the ground. Don't tell me you're our new instructor. Isn't that a little anti? Naruto trailed off. Not really being able to think of the word. As dumbfounded as the other 2 members were by the strange man's entrance, Rock Lee managed a suggestion, anticlimactic. Yeah. Naruto hadn't really paid attention to what Lee had said, but responded out of habit. He was still trying to figure out why Ero Sennin was here. Tsunade wasted no time, choosing rather to keep the young ninja off balance. Introduce yourself to your new cell, Jiraiya-sensei. There was a mocking lilt to the title she gave him. Jiraiya sighed in response. This really wasn't something he wanted to do, but Tsunade had made it a choice less matter for him. He eyed his 3 new charges, quickly sizing them up. He had led a cell once before, it made sense he could do it again. All right then, my name is Jiraiya and I've been asked by the Hokage to be the cell leader for the new cell, 15. Our first mission, I guess, is to first go to Sunagaku, where we will do some co-ed training. I've been informed in detail about your abilities and such stuff. It just wasn't in him to remain serious for any long period of time. Hinata was a little overwhelmed by all these things happening at once. She thought about all her old classmates going through a similar situation, including Shino and Kiba. At first she feared her father would try and bar her from the mission, but she quickly realized that her father had given up on her. She wouldn't have to worry about what her father would think on her performance for this mission. She only had her own standards to measure up to now. My name is Hyuga Hinata, it's a pleasure. She managed to stammer out. She did her best to inject some confidence in herself and not fidget during her introduction. Rock Lee stepped forward to introduce himself next. It is an honor to meet you, sir. My name is Rock Lee and I'm glad to be put on this cell. I will be saddened to leave Guy-sensei's side, but I am positive that we all can complete this mission with great success. He finished with the very heavily used, good guy pose. Jiraiya's face fell. This kid acted just like Guy did at that age. Feeling a headache coming on, he looked at Naruto briefly. "You don't have to bother, kid. I already know you," he said in mock disinterest. Naruto stuck out his tongue at Jiraiya in response. "Hinata, you have the Hyuga chakra control and have taken a slight interest in healing from what I've heard." He did his best to give her a friendly smile. Naruto heard that and immediately thought back to the time during the Chunin exam. There had been a bomb that she had given him, and it had been pretty good at aiding his already monstrous healing ability. There is a retired medic nin by the name of Chio at Sunagaku that could teach you a lot of medical jutsus. At least that's what Tsunade hopes. I however have doubts about her willingness to help us. He gave a sidelong look at Tsunade. "Yes, Jiraiya, your feelings are clear on that matter. Do continue," Tsunade interjected. Right. Anyways, even I can understand the need for more medic nin. It's something our village has been decidedly lacking." He knew it was a jibe at Tsunade, but she deserved it for roping him into this whole thing. "She believes you have the potential to become a medic nin," he added matter-of-factly. He didn't miss the shocked expression on her face. He also did. NT Miss Naruto noticing Hinata's shocked expression. "That's so cool, Hinata. You'd make a great medic nin. That'd certainly show those stuffy Hyugas that you're just as good as any other ninja." Naruto grinned widely and slapped Hinata on the back approvingly. The thick-headed boy didn't even notice her embarrassed blush at his confidence in her. Thank you, Naruto-kun. She wished she had more confidence to talk to the boy who always had the words to encourage her. The hermit ninja didn't miss the way Hinata and Naruto acted toward each other. Deciding he'd better worry about the situation between those two later, Jiraiya continued on to the next member of his new cell. "Rock Lee, off the top of my head I don't know any taijutsu experts that could teach you anything you don't already know. When it comes to self-training, you're the most efficient member of the cell from what I've heard, so that should help. Tsunade has however told me that Gaara of the Sand has requested to train with both you and Naruto. While I'm training Naruto, you two can do whatever, I guess." Jiraiya then finally turned his attention to his apprentice. "Naruto, the original idea was for me to train you one-on-one. While those two are busy training with the Sand Ninja, I will mostly be training you. That hasn't changed. I admit that will be pretty difficult, seeing as not only do I not have any intimate edge of the Hyuga blood limiter much beyond the simplest healing jutsus, I'm not exactly what you'd consider a taijutsu expert either, but I'm sure someone as cool as me will think of something." He laughed at that last part. Tsunade reclined in her chair, propping her feet up on the desk. It was time for this meeting to end. "Cell 15, you are now dismissed for the day. You have 4 days to do whatever you want. On the 5th day, report to the main gate. There you will leave with Jiraiya to Sunagaku. Bye-bye." She waved at them with a smile on her face. The new cell slowly filtered out of the Hokage's office. Hinata was the last to leave and bowed respectfully to the Hokage before exiting. She noticed that their new sensei remained in the room. A man with bandana wrapped over his head, and a senbon needle between his teeth ran past them into the Hokage's office. Genma immediately began making his report to the Hokage. Kotetsu quickly shut the doors and moved to stand guard. The new teammates glanced at the door before continuing out of the tower. Each member now filled with thoughts of what was to come. Naruto and Rock Lee both felt this was a great opportunity. Naruto was glad to have some of his friends along on his training journey now, and Lee was thinking about how he could learn and experience many things. For them it would be a great beginning. Hinata felt much apprehension and worry. She didn't want to fail in some way on this important mission. She remembered her Nindo, the one she gained from Naruto. She had promised her father she would succeed in this training mission. She resolved herself not to go back on her word or run away from her responsibilities. She hadn't realized it yet, but she had walked into the tower with a sense of self-doubt, but had come out with something different. Now, as she walked out of the tower, she walked straighter than when she went in. This was a beginning of something great for her. All Jiraiya could think of was how much he was going to pay back Tsunade. The second he got out of the tower, he was going to find some aspirin and do some research to take his mind off of the recent events. He felt the beginning of a great headache come over him. Later, in a sparsely lit room, 3 figures stood bathed in the working lights of many computers and other machines. The one closest to the only door in the room spoke first. Orochimaru-sama, it has been reported that Uzumaki Naruto and your old teammate have exited the Hokage Tower with 2 others. The Snake Sannin looked at his platinum-haired subordinate W.Ith eyes like the dead. Kukuku, is Jiraiya really stupid enough to take on a new cell at his age? I gave him far too much credit. Kabuto didn't think that anyone else would ever be able to match his lord's mastery over the sneer. This does also mean that he will not be able to act upon us in any way if he is encumbered by that cell, Orochimaru-sama. A third voice rang out in the darkness. Nothing they can do will be able to stop us. People like them have no idea what they're doing and they'll be killed off eventually. The speaker's eyes spun madly as he spoke. In darkness like this, Kabuto had a hard time telling who was who sometimes. Sprouting leaves. A day after the forming of Cell 15 found Naruto sitting on a bench in one of the more remote areas of the village. The bench he saw, Tion, was on the side of a wide road with many houses and apartment complexes situated around it. The afternoon sun had long ago been swallowed up by the darkening sky, which was filled with clouds of varying grays. And a strong wind blew, blowing his hair in all directions. A cool and clean smell permeated the air, signaling the onset of rain. He couldn't help but think this weather was odd, considering yesterday had been completely cloudless. The normally energetic boy had both of his arms braced around the back of the bench. His head leaned back, allowing him a perfect view of the turbulent sky. He had decided on holding off on his extensive training for the little break he had been given. It was a decision he was beginning to regret, for he hadn't really thought of what he would do for the 4 days if he wasn't training. After spending an indeterminable amount of time watching the clouds far overhead roll across the heavens, a loud sound pierced the calm atmosphere. His stomach's growly. Had never steered him wrong with its intentions before. The only thing he could do in a situation like this was give it what it wanted. Naruto slowly collected himself before resolving himself to the course that had been laid out for him. He gave up a few stretches in an attempt to inject some energy back into his body before he started off towards a certain restaurant. After finishing up his warm-up, he was surprised to find someone standing not but a few feet away down his intended path. For a second he had a hard time placing who it was, but this person was hardly unrecognizable. Hyuga Neji was one of the last people he had expected to see today. The Hyuga branch house genius looked very different than his cousin Hinata. Despite that, the same pale orbs that marked the Hyuga line were prominent on his chiseled and angular face. A pleasant change in the boy was the expression of smoldering anger that used to mar his face was replaced by a cool calm, making him look like some kind of regal statue. His raven-colored hair still hung down to his waist with a small tie near the end. For this day at least he had traded his old white shirt and gray pants for a white formal kimono. Naruto could not figure out why such a change was made, but in an odd way it suited Neji. "Hey Neji, what's up?" Naruto continued walking forward, unfazed. "Good afternoon Naruto, I'm glad I was able to find you before my cell departs for Wave Country. We leave tomorrow and I must admit I've had very little free time of late." Neji fell in line next to Naruto, deciding to follow him wherever he was going. "As that's so, my cell is supposed to be heading for Wind Country in 4 days. I was beginning to think I wouldn't see anyone before I left. Everyone seems to be so busy that I couldn't even see Sakura-chan. Oh yeah, did you know that Hinata and Fuzzy Brows are on my new cell?" Naruto thought Neji might be surprised to hear that bit of news. Neji just smiled. It seemed Naruto always tried to cram too much information when he talked. "Both Hinata-sama and Lee told me about their assignment to your cell. It is good to know someone I can trust will be able to look after Hinata-sama." Naruto hadn't been expecting that. What do you mean by that? He couldn't think of a reason why Hinata needed anyone looking after her or anything like that. I feel like I should be remembering something. That something tickled at the back of his mind. If it was important, he should be remembering what it was, shouldn't he? Naruto. Neji sounded a bit disappointed. "I told you during the Chunin exam about how Hinata-sama was almost abducted by a cloud nin, and how that led to my father's death. Don't you remember that? Is it possible I was wrong about him?" Seeing the serious expression on his companion's face, Naruto didn't think this was going to be just a friendly chat. He figured he should pay attention, at least if this was about Hinata. "Yeah, I remember what you said then. Is that what you're worried about? That someone might abduct her or something, because of your bloodline? He stuffed his hands in his pockets for want of anything better to do with them. It's a possibility that she could be in danger, yes. The normally dour youth seemed very concerned for his younger cousin. Naruto didn't like being led around in a conversation, and that's exactly what it felt like right now. Hinata went out on missions with her old cell, right? What's so different about this time? In the past, Hinata-sama's missions have never taken her very far from the village before. Your cell will be traveling to a foreign, albeit allied country where your knowledge of the area will be next to nothing. Your mission will then take you to Rain Country. This country has pted to gain our bloodline in the past as well. A worried look passed over the Naruto's face. Oh, I didn't think so many people would want your bloodline, but what does? Hinata-sama was disowned from being heir to the main house and declared a liability by her father Hiashi-sama. He has since replaced her with her more skilled sister Hanabi-sama. Even though Hinata-sama is no longer of the in-house, the threat of having the clan bloodline stolen is still present. Hiashi-sama had a hard time placating the leaders of our clan just to allow her participation on your mission. The two began to enter the more heavily traveled areas of the village. The foot traffic increased in number and diversity as the buildings along the road grew larger and closer together. Wait a minute, if her Thayer disowned her because she's useless to them, why is he letting her go on a training mission? If what you say is true, then why should he care if she gets stronger? From what he'd heard so far, the Hokage hopeful wasn't forming the best opinion of Hinata's father. Especially if her bloodline is in danger or whatever. How could any father dare treat his own daughter like nothing more than a liability? It is true that when she made Genin, Hiashi-sama declared she was of no use to the Hyuga and her well-being was not his concern anymore. It is also true that he has been trying to mend fences with Hinata-sama as of late. Neji only had a smile as he saw Naruto's confused suspension of belief. The Hyuga genius had to admit that the boy walking next to him might have well saved the relationship between father and daughter, not to mention his own relationship with them. He continued, Hinata-sama told him of the things you said to her during the Chunin exam, of how you told her to bel Iev in herself and of how well she continued to fight with those words. I also told him of what I experienced in our own battle, and how you changed me by showing me that destiny is not fixed from birth. I believe with your encouragement and the protection of someone as trustworthy as Jiraiya-sama that Hinata-sama can become far stronger. Hiashi-sama has agreed to my argument and convinced the clan council. Their decision was that she could be reinstated as the heir should she become a Chunin as a result of your mission. This is the reason they are risking such a potential risk to their bloodline. Naruto felt like some of this was a little beyond him. What if she doesn't want to be the heir anymore? It seems to me like she'd do much better without all that pressure. I mean, from what I've heard of the main house, she doesn't seem to fit in all that well with them. The two started to encounter fellow ninja mixed in with regular villagers as they made the heart of the city. It was hard not to find some kind of foot traffic in all parts of Konoha at this time. I think I can put my fears to rest. I know he will look out for her. Neji smiled. That is for Hinata-sama to decide for herself. We have always been the strongest clan in Konoha, yet because of this Hinata is constantly pressured to be the best, and this is not what she needs. What she needs. A look of concern found its way back to Naruto's face. Why are the Hyuga asking this of her, and why so suddenly? He had a bad feeling he was being drawn into a very complicated situation with all of this. Doesn't Hinata get a say in any of this? Especially since the Hyuga seemed more interested in protecting their asses than what she wants. The more Neji told him of Hinata's situation, the more he felt his anger rising. Neji continued on as if he hadn't heard Naruto's interjection. What she needs is a friend, Naruto. I believe you are the one that can not only encourage her when she doesn't believe in herself, but can also get her to open up and realize her potential. If Hinata-sama were to realize what she can do, I have no doubt she'd make an excellent ninja, with or without coming back to the main house. Naruto wanted to ask why Neji was asking so much of him, but decided he probably didn't want to know. I don't want to have anything to do with something that will force Hinata to do something she doesn't want. The blonde-haired boy knew that they were finally coming upon Ichiraku Ramen. It would only take 2 more blocks of walking before they made it there. I'm not asking this of you to make Hinata-sama a better tool for the Hyuga. I'm just asking this as a friend to be her friend. Talk to her and confide in her. She needs someone to believe in her far more than she needs bodyguards and unreasonable family members. Naruto relaxed after hearing that. If you're just asking me to be her friend, then I don't think I'll have a problem with that. I already consider Hinata a friend. He felt like he could trust Neji on this. Thank you, Naruto. I can rest assured that she will do well with you as a friend. Neji took notice of Naruto's more relaxed nature after what he had said. Right, but I'd rather not have to deal with this whole clan succession mess if I could. Neji had to resist the urge to smack his forehead. He would have sworn Naruto would have gotten it by now. Naruto, you told me you were going to change the Hyuga when you become Hokage, yet you don't seem to know much at all about our clan. There are many dynamics to consider and understand. You're a person that likes to talk a lot. But Hinata-sama is someone that shies away from most conversation. If you were to ask her about the Hyuga clan, it would give you something to talk about. At that point, Neji actually let out a small chuckle. You seem to be trying awfully hard to get me to talk to Hinata. What's all this about? It was obvious that Neji wasn't going to answer that question, but he felt compelled to ask it anyway. Naruto had no idea why Neji suddenly changed the topic to being about him talking with Hinata. At any rate, Naruto, I'll let you get to your lunch. Before I go, I have something for you to deliver. Neji noticed how Naruto was trying hard not to stare at the menu of the ramen stand they had just arrived at. He knew it was time for him to go lest Naruto forget his manners and just start ordering food. He reached a hand into the folds of his kimono and pulled out a decent-sized scroll. This is a scroll of Juken and other Hyuga techniques for Hinata-sama. Is this for her to study during your mission? In case you lose it, there's a seal on it that will instantly destroy the contents if it's opened. It's an old Hyuga-style seal, and only a Hyuga would know how to open it. I was late finishing this for her, so I won't be able to give it to her before I leave. Could you please give it to her when next you see her? He'd only mentioned the seal so Naruto himself wouldn't try and take a peek. Naruto took the proffered scroll and stuffed it in his pants pocket. You're still a weird guy, Neji, but I'm glad you've made up with Hinata and her father. The next time we see each other we'll all be chunin. He thrust his hand at Neji for a friendly shake, giving him his best grin. The taller boy took Naruto's hand, shaking it in a friendly manner while staring him square in the eyes. I know you'll be even stronger than the Naruto you are now, and I can't wait to try myself against you again. Neji held Naruto's gaze for a moment longer and finally turned and began walking away from the ramen stand. The last thing Neji heard from Naruto gave him more peace of mind than he expected. Naruto somehow knew that he didn't need to voice his assent to the challenge that Neji had given him. Don't worry, Neji, I don't exactly know what you expect from me, but I'll look out for her. After Neji disappeared into the crowd, Naruto turned around and walked under the curtain of the ramen stand. He plopped himself down on his favorite seat with a heavy sigh. Neji had said a lot of odd and confusing things. He had a feeling he'd be thinking about his a lot now too. Just what he needed. He almost would have said he'd lost his appetite, but suddenly the smell of freshly prepared ingredients made the decision for him. Konoha's Azure Beast. Rock Lee had plenty of things to do before the deadline of his cell's departure came. The time not spent training intensively with Guy-sensei would most likely be spent convincing his aunt that he would be alright for the time he would be gone. Lee was currently doing lateral push-ups with only his right hand alongside his teacher. The leaf knows I haven't exactly inspired her confidence in me why being sent to the hospital a while ago. Not to mention I didn't even wait for my injuries to heal before rushing off into combat. Lee knew that she knew there was no choice for her but to let him go. She could still make him feel guilty about leaving, however. What's the matter, Lee? Have you had enough training for today? You don't even seem to be breaking a sweat. Konoha's taijutsu expert Guy spoke up in between intoning 767 and 768 as he powered through his own rigorous training. Lee hadn't even realized that he had stopped doing his push-ups while thinking about his aunt. His teacher must have thought it was due to overexertion. No Guy-sensei, I was only thinking about the mission before me. I won't be coming back for a while and I was just worrying about a few things. Uukli struggled to synchronize his number of push-ups with those of his sensei. When Lee and Guy both reached the count of 800, they stopped, and fell neatly into sitting positions. Lee looked up the sky as let himself rest from his exerting exercise. The clouds high overhead were almost pregnant with rain. It looked like they would have to head indoors if they didn't want to get soaked in the ensuing rain. Deciding that staying dry was better than getting some unnecessary rest, Lee shot up into a standing position. Guy-sensei, I think it's time we went inside before we find ourselves drenched. Guy likewise shoved himself effortlessly into a standing position to face his pupil. I believe you were right, Lee. Maybe we can find another place to train. To say Guy and his puppy were look-alikes would be a gross understatement. The only real distinguishing features between the two was Guy's flak jacket, not to mention the difference in height and age. Lee got his manner of D.'s in appearance from his sensei for some reason, so it was always like looking in a mirror for them. The training ground they had been working out in was actually the same one that Lee had found Naruto in the previous day. They left the same way he had yesterday, making their way towards the village. It was as if the raging storm was trying to turn the Leaf Village into a lake village. There had been no real beginning to the torrential rain, it just sprang into existence without warning. Hinata had been one of many to get caught in the rain. She had been on her way back home after visiting with her old teammate Aburame Shino at his home when the rainstorm had suddenly hit. There was no way she was going to make it home without getting sopping wet, so she had to find a suitably dry place to wait it out. After only a few moments running through the rain-soaked streets, she came across an open shop door and ducked inside, thankful for a quick solution to her problem. What greeted her the moment she walked into the shop was a veritable assault on the senses. There was a vast array of bright colors decorating almost every inch of the large room, and the sheer variety of smells was overwhelming. The combination of the two was both smothering and stimulating, held together in an odd balance. She was standing in the most beautiful flower shop she had ever seen. "Welcome to our shop. How may I help you?" The speaker's sudden greeting stopped as abruptly as it had started. Hinata turned quickly to the sound of the voice. She was slightly surprised at who it was that greeted her. Hinata-san, what brings you to the Yamanaka's humble flower shop? A young girl approached the timid Hinata, smiling warmly. Yamanaka Ino was considered to be the most beautiful out of all Konoha's female genin. To retain such a title, she certainly spent enough time keeping it that way. Her light blonde hair held a perfect glossy sheen, and at the moment was held up in an array of bouncy curls. Her face bore the complexion of one who stood for no foreign mark marring her perfect skin, and her blue eyes sparkled with a love for life. She was currently decked out in a dark blue knee-length skirt accompanied by a matching pastel blue halter top. Hinata knew Ino well enough through the girl's sizable reputation. Ever since she had been young, Hinata had heard of Ino's popularity and beauty. Ino was always very outspoken and seemed to almost possess a dual personality at times. Sometimes Ino could be very friendly, and at other times she could fly off the cuff at the slightest provocation. The Hyuga heir didn't want to experience one of her more disagreeable moods if she could help it. You don't have to address me as San Ino-san." The instant she said that, Hinata knew it sounded a little odd. Likewise Hinata-chan, Ino smiled again. It looked like she was in one of her better moods, for now. Hinata smiled meekly in response. "I didn't know your family owned a flower shop, Ino-chan." She stumbled for a split second over the suffix, but recovered in time. Ino quickly glanced over all the shelves and display cases full of flowers of varying shapes and sizes. It was true that there probably wasn't a better flower shop in the entire village, yet she didn't think that someone like the shy Hinata would have any interest in flowers. "So did you come to buy some flowers?" She took a quick look outside. "Or did the rain chase you in here?" she added with a playful grin. Hinata was a little embarrassed at that question. It's true she ran in here because of the rain. But she did have a vested interest in flower pressing to her name. This also forced her to note that there was a good deal of water dripping from her to the shop floor. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring water into your store." She quickly looked around for something she could use to dry off with. "Nah, it's okay. I'm minding the store right now anyway. Ino took one of her and towels from behind the register and proffered it to Hinata, and it's not like the water would need you as an excuse to get everywhere. Ino had to admit to herself that she felt an odd urge to be extra nice to the girl before her. It was an urge she never felt the need for around forehead girl, the only other girl she really knew. While you're here, I guess I could show you some of our flowers. She retrieved a towel from the counter and handed it to the wet girl. Hinata forgot about her prior embarrassment, and a small smile creped over her lips. I'd like that, in fact. Actually I do flower pressings as a hobby. It occurred to her that she could do well to mention a hobby that shared roots with the other girls. Now Ino was interested. Oh yeah, which flowers do you like? She'd be the first to admit that flowers weren't her favorite thing, but this was the first time she had talked to anyone who had even a slight interest in the subject. Suddenly being put on the spot, Hinata tried to remember what flowers she fancied. I guess I really like iris and violets. I think they're the prettiest out of the ones I've collected. She honestly never knew she'd be able to talk so easily with someone like Ino. This wasn't how she'd ever imagined a conversation like this would have gone between them. Oh really? Both flowers have a strong meaning of faithfulness behind them, as well as other strong interpersonal feelings. They can complement each other pretty well in a spring arrangement. The last person Ino thought she'd have hit it off with would be this shy and mostly introverted girl. But she had heard of stranger things, maybe. Hinata was instantly impressed by that insight. Wow, I guess you learn a lot from working in a flower shop. I never would have guessed there was such a deeper meaning to them. In fact, she had never given any thought to such things, assuming that no one would ever have taken the time to characterize flowers in such a way. Ino smiled. She was sensing Hinata probably didn't talk this much on a normal basis, so now was as good a chance as any to ask. So Hinata-chan, you've been assigned to one of these new cells, right? Who'd you get paired with? She hadn't seen hide nor hair of Choji or Shikamaru in the past few days. Hinata was actually the first of the other genin she had seen since she herself had been reassigned. The question caught Hinata off guard. She hadn't been expecting such a rapid shift in topic. I've been assigned to a cell with Lee-san and Naruto-kun, and I think our cell leader Jiraiya is one of the legendary Sannin. She had been more comfortable discussing flowers. Oh yeah, really? Well, unfortunately I got stuck with Kiba and Ten. We haven't even met our leader yet, some old friend of the Hokages or something. So she's one of Kiba's new teammates. Kiba-kun's not a bad guy, he's very reliable and energetic. He always knows how to get a smile out of. Small talk was not one of her strong points. I honestly think Kiba's a bit too energetic, and that dog of his is just as bad, and it sheds. That Ten girl seems to be a little uptight and bossy, but I guess I'll have to make do. Ino heaved a heavy sigh. From what I hear, our sensei is supposed to be real batty, and a friend of the Hokage or something like that. She took the used towel from Hinata when she was done drying off. You speak highly of a former teammate, of course, but what do you think about your new teammates? This coming from someone with as many personality defects as the next person. Ino turned and walked over to the counter, forcing Hinata to follow suit. The temporary proprietress offered her guest a stool from behind the counter, then promptly hopped up on the counter next to the register. The WN pour outside didn't seem like it would let out anytime soon. It sounded like 1,000 small rocks were pelting the roof. Hinata thanked Ino for the seat, then decided she had to answer the question. Lee-san is a good friend of Neji-ni-san, and so far he seems to be a really good guy. Talking about someone as much of a stranger to her as Lee was easy compared to the thought of trying to talk about Naruto. Every time she talked about him around Kiba, he always teased her about it, and she didn't want to think what someone as gossipy as Ino could do. Naruto-kun is a very hard worker and always does his best. And he always has kind things to say. She ignored the smirk she thought she saw appear on the other girl's lips. Our sensei and Naruto-kun already seem to know each other. He does seem to have his quirks. Hinata never said anything bad about anyone if she could help it. Saying Jiraiya's personality was just quirky was proof enough of this. Ooh, you sure seem to have a lot of good things to say about Naruto. I think even Sakura Forehead doesn't have that many good things to say about him, and she's his teammate. Are you sure we're talking about the same Naruto? Hinata winced. She knew she should have kept silent about Naruto. Naruto-kun is, she futilely grasped for something to say. Ino was many things, but unnecessarily cruel was not one of them. Don't worry about it, Hinata-chan. I think the only one who doesn't know already is the dense boy himself. The subject of Naruto was obviously something sensitive, so she decided that it would be best to avoid it entirely. So where's your cell going to go, or are they staying here? Hinata was silently glad Ino was letting that subject drop, but she didn't like the way Ino had said, no. Oh no, we're going to be traveling to Sunagaku and then hopefully taking the Chunin exam at Omegakure. Ino jumped down off the counter to check out one of the windows. It had occurred to her that the sound of rain had stopped, replacing the soothing murmur of rain with a relatively dull silence. Must be exciting to go to another country. Our cell is staying here, unfortunately. I would love to have a change of scenery every now and again. She sounded slightly miffed as she stared out the window. The sky outside was still a rolling mass of gray, but the pounding accompaniment of the rain had stopped for now. She turned her head to look back at the girl still sitting on the stool. Well, the rain has let up for now, so you should go home while you can. I might as well close up shop at this rate. It doesn't look like I'll be selling anything today anyway. Her remark was accompanied by a wry grin. Hinata shot out of the stool upon hearing this. She quickly walked to one of the heavily littered product tables near the door, where she picked up a small pine bonsai. After a few seconds of careful scrutiny, she made her decision and brought it to the counter. I'd like to buy this. She thrust the plant at Ino. In truth, she had been eyeing the cute miniature tree during the time she had been talking with the other girl. It would be a cute thing to have in her room, and she felt need to repay the hospitality she had been shown. Ino didn't even bother to go behind the counter. Don't worry about it, Hinata-chan, think of it as a gift from a friend. She gave the shy girl a reassuring grin. You really should get going if you want to make it home before it starts raining again though. Hinata hesitated, wondering what she should do. After realizing that any further offer pay for the plant would be rejected, she decided that her new friend was correct. Hinata gave a respectful bow to Ino. Thank you very much for your hospitality, and the bonsai. She held up the aforementioned plant. Ino walked Hinata to the door of her shop. The bonsai-toting girl seemed reluctant to leave at first, but after some more insistence she started walking down the road. Ino had heard that Hinata possessed very few friends. If any, she found nothing wrong with the girl, but it was obvious that she was very lonely. Thinking on this, she suddenly had a strong impulse to call out to her. Hey, Hinata-chan, don't be afraid to come back by next time even if our shop is closed. Friends are always welcome at our home. Hinata spun around and stared at the yelling girl. She never had a friend outside of her cellmates before, and the last friend she had expected to make would have been Ino. She didn't take too well to yelling, so she simply gave a meek wave before continuing down the road. Lately things seemed to be getting better for her day by day. As she hurried home, she had to wonder what she was going to do with the plant if she wasn't going to be around to care for it. Maybe I can ask Neji-ni-san to take care of it. Rock Lee stepped out of Jim's interior and was greeted by the cool night air. The cloud cover that had threatened Konoha for most of the day must have dispersed for the most part, considering the amount of stars he could see in the night sky now. There were puddles of varying sizes dotting the ground, and the gentle breeze running through the streets carried the pleasing smell of fresh rain. For such a rough storm, it certainly left a pleasant presence behind. After the rain had started its assault on Konoha, Lee and Guy had proceeded to the gym only to have to quit a couple of hours later. A messenger had come for the elite Junin and requested his presence before the Hokage to take on a S-class mission. After a lot of heartfelt and youthful crying, goodbyes, and pointless advice, Guy had departed and left Lee to train by himself for the rest of the day. After a prolonged stroll through the village, Lee finally returned home. Home, for him, was not much more than a shabby two-bedroom house in one of the poorer sections of the village. His parents had died when he was very young, and the only remaining family he had was his mother's sister. She had tried hard to support them over the years, but with only her deceased husband's pension to live off of, there wasn't much she could afford. That didn't matter one bit to him. Her love and support was all he had ever needed from her. As he entered the house he could already hear her snoring. It seemed he missed the chance to talk to her again. Lee quickly tiptoed the distance to his room and quietly shut the door. The walls of his small room were decorated with different wall scrolls depicting different training methods as well as some random uplifting messages. The only other things that decorated his room was a harshly used chest of drawers where he kept all of his things, a nightstand complete with lamp and clock, and a somewhat comfy bed. Lee sat down on his bed as he pulled the string on his lamp. No matter how tired he was, he had a nightly ritual to take care of. He pulled out a thick, emerald-colored leather journal complete with matching pen. He had received it as a Earth Day present from his aunt last year, and it summarily replaced his previous 3 journals. He began the task of writing the day's happenings down with a practiced hand. His mind wandered as he jotted down the highlights of the day. I really need to talk to Auntie about my mission. It's only a few days away and I haven't even told her yet. The good thing is she'll still get my weekly pay, so I know she'll be alright. In the space of only a few minutes he had almost written everything down. However, I must see this mission through or Guy-sensei would be disappointed. I must believe the fires of youth will burn for me the path I must take. When he finished writing the day's passage he quietly closed his journal and slipped it back into its drawer. It was now time to change for bed. As he rummaged through his dresser for his required sleeping attire, his thoughts skipped ahead on the few days he had left. The sun shone high in the sky over Kanahagakure, a complete departure from the weather of the past few days. It was almost noon and Cell 15 had assembled in front of the main gate. Well, almost everyone. There was still an important member of their cell missing. Geez, where the hell is that good-for-nothing Aro Sennin? Naruto held his hands clasped behind his head, a peeved expression distorting his face. I'm sure he's just taking care of some last-minute things, Naruto-kun. We weren't actually told what time to meet at the gates, so maybe Hinata trailed off, unsure of what exactly their sensei could be doing. In truth, Tsunade hadn't actually set an exact time to meet at the gate. The 3 assembled genin had met yesterday to set a time they would meet up at. They had now been waiting over an hour on the muddy main road outside Konoha's gates for Jiraiya to show up. Someone as legendary and respected as Jiraiya-sensei will surely have a good reason why he hasn't come sooner. Lee was somewhat distracted by keeping his focus on concentrating. Gee, what little chakra control he had at his feet to stay above the beeping mud. You guys don't know him like I do. He's probably doing something perverted at a bathhouse somewhere. Why do I always have to get the weird senseis? At this point Naruto would give anything to have someone normal take care of his training, if it was only just the once. It turned out they didn't have to wait for very much longer. A small discharge of smoke erupted in front of the assembled genins. Once the coiling smoke dissipated they could make out their cell leader standing before them. Naruto was the only one surprised to see a big red hand-shaped mark on his face. Oi, you were caught peeping again, weren't you, you old pervert? Naruto pointed an accusatory finger at the obviously guilty man. His only response was to shoot his original pupil with a reproachful glare. Are the 3 of you ready to set off? He did his best to sound like he wasn't angry at something. Almost in unison the 3 walked over to retrieve their overstuffed backpacks from one of the only dry spots along the gate's wall. They hefted their bags with various survival gear and personal effects onto their backs and rejoined their sensei by the open gates. Yeah, we've been ready. I've got everything I'll need, Jiraiya-sensei. I am ready to go as well. Jiraiya himself had only a small shoulder bag with him filled with God only knew what. Well then, Cell 15, it looks like our mission begins as of now. The 4 of them finally departed from the gates of their hometown. The chance to participate in a mission that their own Hokage had deemed vital to the survival of the village didn't come around every day. The frog hermit let his 3 charges walk ahead of him while he was content with just strolling lazily behind them. All right, finally our mission begins. Naruto couldn't contain his excitement as he pumped his hands into the air. His infectious mood carried onto his 2 teammates, and they felt themselves smiling despite all the danger they knew they were sure to face in the upcoming months. Leaving home. It had been a few hours now that Cell 15 had spent on the road. The slow pack Their sensei Jiraiya had set for them afforded many chances to take in the landscape of the Konoha area. It seemed to them that there was anywhere within the land of fire that one could escape the encompassing noise of rustling leaves. The further they seemed to get from their village, the less the presence of rain from yesterday was showing itself. Pools of water no longer dotted the roadside, and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot only further punctuated the fact that the rainstorm had not passed this area. Naruto, Hinata, and Rock Lee had spent the past hours with idle chatter while busy ing their eyes with counting the different kind of trees they passed by. Currently Naruto was walking in between Lee and Hinata while Jiraiya walked behind them with only the occasional comment to let them know he was actually still there. Geez, how many different trees are there? Naruto had tried to keep count but he lost track a couple miles back. Hinata smiled, thinking it was nice that both she and Naruto-kun had been thinking the same thing. I've counted 22 different kinds so far, Naruto-kun. Ah, I must have missed 2 then. Lee had also been trying his hand at counting trees. The middle boy smiled at that. Well, Hinata has that Byakugan to see everywhere, so I guess that helps. Actually, Naruto-kun, my Byakugan only works when I activate it. Hinata didn't want to prove Naruto-kun wrong, but she thought it would be better if he knew. Naruto rubbed the back of his head apologetically. Ah, sorry Hinata, I guess you're just more observant, huh? His offhand comment caused Hinata to give a slight blush. Maybe you're just oblivious, Jiraiya added dryly from the rear. Ah, shut up. Naruto shot back, a little embarrassed. Their conversations had gone on like this since they had left the village. By this point in their journey the sun had already passed its zenith and begun its path to setting. The legendary Toad Sannin was counting the minutes until, in the very least, Naruto began asking him his usual annoying questions. Perhaps because the 3 genins had been watching the trees so closely they each noticed the same thing. The further they got from Konoha the further spaced the trees became. By this point they began noticing clearings spaced out within the slowly thinning forest. Naruto liked trees as much as the next person, but he figured there were more important things to talk about. I wonder how long it's going to take us before we reach Sunagaku. He was beginning to wonder if they would ever see anything besides trees anytime soon. Lee took on the task of answering. If we continue at this pace we should be able to reach Sunagaku in. Lee struggled to do the calculations in his head quickly. He had studied a map before leaving his house earlier in the morning. It'll take us 4 days to reach Wind Country and about another day to reach Sunagaku itself. Jiraiya had brought himself closer so that now he was directly behind his charges. There's a major city on the way there, right? Hinata had only a limited knowledge of the continent's geography. She remembered a few things about the city from her lessons. Very good, Hinata-chan. On our second night out we should have reached Akirahara and we'll be staying there. His smile was evident on his voice. Hinata was not used to being praised for anything. She decided that it was definitely something she liked. Thank you, Jiraiya-sensei. Naruto shared in Jiraiya's sentiments, but something about the open beep calling Hinata-chan made him uneasy. It looked like I'd have to watch their sensei around Hinata for her own good. Oh, I take it we'll be staying outdoors the rest of the time. Ninja were required to keep some form of outdoor sleeping supplies on any extended mission, so it wasn't like he was unprepared. Jiraiya finally decided it was time to join his team, so he took up a position walking next to Lee. That's right, we can stop in Akirahara are some new supplies, but we'll be roughing it the rest of the time. Well, if we're going to be on the road for this long before we even reach Sunagaku, why don't you teach us some new jutsus or something? Ah, there was the question he had been waiting for. Jiraiya threw up his hands and shrugged. You know, Naruto, there's more to a ninja's training besides learning new jutsus. You're just saying that because you're too lazy to teach us anything. Naruto had been expecting something underhanded like that from him. You seem to have forgotten all I've taught you already, Jiraiya countered. Hinata and Lee walked in silence, observing how master and pupil interacted. Hinata didn't want to hurt Naruto's case by suggesting some other topic of study, and Lee didn't feel like it was the right time to bring up the fact he couldn't use jutsus just yet. Well, this is different. It's your job to teach us useful jutsus and whatnot now, right? Naruto had to wonder why his 2 teammates hadn't jumped in to help him yet. Fine. First, why don't we let your friends tell me what jutsus they have learned so far so I can see where I stand with all this? Hinata didn't really want to admit to the appallingly small amount of jutsus she knew. She knew Naruto-kun must have a ton of useful jutsus he could use, and she didn't want him to think she was useless because of that. I can use the Mai Byakugan, Bunshin, Henge, and some Juken. She blushed with embarrassment. I've also learned the walk on water technique. Naruto did exactly the opposite of what she had been expecting. That's pretty cool, Hinata. I bet you'll be a lot better at learning new jutsus than I am. Maybe I could even teach you Kage Bunshin. He practically beamed with confidence at her. She had to resist blushing again. This time for a different reason than just embarrassment. Lee spoke up next. I've never been able to use ninjutsu and genjutsu, but I believe that I can become an excellent ninja on taijutsu alone. That is everything to me. That is my nindo. He spoke so passionately that it caught Jiraiya off guard. With conviction like that, it was possible that the green spandex-clad boy could achieve what he wanted to. Hinata felt kind of bad for her earlier discomfort. Naruto had even cheered her up, but Rock Lee hadn't even been bothered by the fact that he didn't know any jutsus. In fact, he thrived on his inability to perform jutsus. Lee started like he just remembered something. Actually, I also have been taught the walk on water technique by Guy-sensei. He smiled sheepishly at that admission. That's about all I can do though. Jiraiya assessed what he now knew of his pupil's abilities. He still had the basic idea of what he wanted to teach Naruto in his head, but Hinata and Lee posed problems. Hyugas were usually taught by their own clan and possessed a specific method of training, so he wasn't really sure how he was going to handle that yet. Lee posed a different kind of problem. The boy could only use taijutsu, and that was something he never excelled at himself. He'd have to think of some kind of training regime quick if he wanted to keep his sanity. All of a sudden Naruto began blindly rummaging in his pack for something. After a moment he finally produced what he had been searching for. He leaned closer to Hinata and held out a rather large scroll to her. This is something I was told to give you from Neji. He said that there was a bunch of Hyuga stuff in jutsus and stuff in it. She hesitantly took it from him and held it before her, considering it closely. She had never seen a scroll like this anywhere in the Hyuga's possession before. Did he say where he got this? He made it himself, I guess. That's what he said anyways. He was glad Neji made the scroll. It seemed like Hinata was pretty grateful for it. Oh yeah, he did say that only you could remove the seal on it. I guess it's a Hyuga thing. Jiraiya stretched out his arms in relief. It seemed to take care of one of his worries for the moment. If he didn't have to worry about Hinata's training, he could focus on trying to figure out what to do with Lee, and Naruto of course. Thank you, Naruto-kun. Carefully placing the scroll within her pack, she could only wonder what kind of things Neji had put in there that was for her eyes only. Something suddenly occurred to Lee. Hey Hinata-chan, I used to train against Neji-san all the time. I'm sure we could spar sometime if you need practice. He gave her a good guy pose right over Naruto. In truth, he not only thought of the help it could give Hinata, but also his own desire to fight a Hyuga again. Thank you, Lee-san. She had jumped back when Lee had stuck his thumb out at her. When she realized what it was, she quickly fell back into a comfortable pace. Lee's response was to let out a hearty laugh. So when are you going to train us, Ero Sennin? Naruto had a feeling he might have to beat the willingness out of their sensei if there was ever going to be any training done around here. The frog hermit figured he had to throw them something, or he figured he would have a mutiny on his hands. Fine, I'll think of something I can begin training you in for tomorrow. Jiraiya had a feeling much of this mission would be spent finding a way to get back at Tsunade. Just leave me alone till then. Right, Lee declared loudly. All right then, now we're talking. Naruto had achieved his small victory. Later that night, Naruto, Hinata, and Lee sat around a serviceable fire while their sensei slept some yards away. Where each of the three genins had erected a small personal tent, their sensei had decided to just stick with sleeping in his clothes. The rest of the day had been spent talking about past missions they had done. When the sun had started to set and the sky colored as if it was on fire, Jiraiya told them to start looking for a place to set up camp. Once they had gotten a couple dozen miles from Konoha, the amount of trees finally petered out to the point where it really couldn't be called a forest anymore. They had set up their camp near a gigantic olive tree before the sun had finally set behind the horizon. There was enough dirt mixed among the grass that they had been able to fashion a makeshift fire pit. Now they sat around the low fire quietly discussing the next day. I have to wonder if Jiraiya-sensei has even thought of our teaching schedule for tomorrow. Lee eyed the direction of the sleeping man as he spoke. I don't have to wonder about that. He's probably thinking about anything but that. He knew that the old man didn't always think about perverted things, but the man could be very irresponsible sometimes, and that just irritated him. Hinata had started to catch on herself to the reality of Jiraiya. He is our sensei, so he'll have to think of something, right? She didn't really think that she'd like to see Naruto-kun and Jiraiya-sensei continue to argue about every little thing much longer. For some unfathomable reason, Naruto didn't feel like arguing the point against Hinata. He decided to bring up another point instead. If all else fails, we could always try and teach ourselves, right? At the moment it seemed like the best contingency plan to him. I mean, you have that scroll Hinata, and Lee has his, training. I'm sure if I keep trying I could see up with something really cool as well. His hands punctuated his words with controlled gestures. The real problem is we'll be in Sunagakure soon. We've only recently become their allies, so we might find some resistance while we're there, Lee said clinically. Hinata had thought of the same thing earlier. If we're not careful we could end up on the wrong side of some sand nin. The sand nin from the Chunin exam were scary enough. She shuddered involuntarily at the memory of what she witnessed during that time. Naruto took notice of the shudder and he reached over to pat her shoulder. Don't worry about it, Hinata. Gaara and them are on our side now, right? I'm sure most of the other sand guys see us the same way. He based this observation on absolutely nothing, of course. We'll have to tread lightly for a little while at the very least. We should test the water until we know how the general populace feel. Lee held up a solitary finger for emphasis. We were sent on this mission because the Hokage-sama must believe that we won't be alienated there. She also said Shizune-san is there if we needed any help. Hinata recounted the brief conversation she had with Tsunade before their arrival at the older woman's office the other day. Hey, you're right. Oba-chan wouldn't send us somewhere we'll be unwelcome. That made more sense than just saying Gaara and his siblings were representing their village in their willingness to give aid. I'm sure everything will be all right. In this at least he was confident he was right. Lee suddenly pushed himself into a standing position. He tried to stifle a silent yawn, but failed. I think I'll turn in for the night. If we really are going to receive our first training tomorrow, I want to be extra prepared. He started moving off in the direction their sensei was roughly in. Good night, he called back as he disappeared from the fire's illuminating perimeter. Both Hinata and Naruto responded in kind as they lost sight of him. They were alone now. The only thing keeping them company was the occasional pop from the fire, or the occasional noise from some creature of the night. Hinata shifted uneasily. She had been comfortable enough with Lee there to distract her from her idol, but that distraction was now gone. She still didn't have the confidence to talk to Naruto directly, so she decided she might as well go to sleep herself and spare herself an embarrassing situation. She stood up and was about to bid Naruto goodnight herself when suddenly he cleared his throat. She involuntarily turned to meet the sound, but there was only a sheepish grin on his face to greet her. Hey, Hinata, do you think we could talk a little bit longer, just the two of us? How could she refuse him? Sure, Naruto-kun, what did you want to talk about? She couldn't help but notice how nervous she had become. She quietly retook her place by the fire, sitting ever so close to the boisterous boy. Oh, nothing really, I just wasn't ready to sleep yet. He gave her what she had to assume was a look of apology. She had to resist the urge to hang her head. Naruto-kun, she had almost believed he had wanted specifically to talk to her. He noticed that she seemed a little put off by that. Oh, sorry, I guess what I meant to say was I'm not really sure what to talk about. I figured if you weren't tired we could talk about something. Her spirits lifted once again. She shifted uncomfortably as she tried to think of a good topic. She suddenly had a flash of brilliance. She could ask Naruto-kun how he felt to be on a cell with her. What do you think about being put on this new cell, Naruto-kun? Naruto was relieved he didn't have to think about something to talk about. I dunno, it's a little odd because it was supposed to be just me and Jiraiya-san. I was supposed to be training so I could bring Sasuke back for good this time, but I guess it's cool having some friends along as well. He thought about his new situation for a second. Now that I think about it, I guess I'm pretty fortunate because I don't think I would have been able to take a Chunin exam by myself. He chuckled at this revelation. Neji ne, San and Kiba-kun told me about your mission after they were released from the hospital. I'm really sorry that you couldn't save Sasuke-san. Naruto-kun. I didn't know him very well, but I wish there was something I could have done to help. I know he must have been a really close friend to you. Naruto suddenly looked closely at Hinata. He hadn't been expect such a sudden outpour of compassion. Thank you, Hinata, that means a lot. He wasn't as uncomfortable as he'd thought. He'd be discussing his failure with Hinata. Hinata was an expert on depression and she could see that this is where their conversation was headed. She gave him her best attempt at a reassuring smile. It's good that you get to take the Chunin exam now though. I can't imagine what it would be like to leave all your friends behind for a couple years and then come back only to find everyone else had made Chunin before you. Yeah, you're right. It's not like I think having you and Lee along is going to interfere with my training. But no matter what, I have to get stronger. I promised Sakura-chan that we'd definitely bring Sasuke back this time. Passion suddenly entered his voice as he thought about how much this mission meant to him. Hinata had almost forgotten about Sakura, the object of Naruto-kun's constant affections, and also the forehead girl Ino had referenced. When she thought of that pink-haired girl he suddenly felt a pang of something she'd never felt before. She eventually realized that there was only one thing it could be: jealousy. Was she jealous that Sakura-san got all the attention from Naruto-kun? Up to this point in her life she was content with just admiring Naruto-kun and desiring to be like him. Now that she had every chance to spend a lot of time with him on this mission, could situation between them change to something more? While Hinata tried to deal with her confusing thoughts, Naruto just kept on going. Ero Sennin said we have 3 years before Orochimaru can possess Sasuke, so I have to train harder than I ever have before. The same passion as earlier crept back into his voice. Hinata pieced together some bits of information she had heard over the past months. Orochimaru is the man who killed the Sandaime Hokage, right? That means he's also the man that tried to ally the Suna against us. Naruto nodded at her conclusion. Orochimaru was once a teammate of Ero Sennin. He gave up on that snake bastard a long time ago, but I will not give up on Sasuke like he did. Naruto didn't even bother to hide his utter contempt for the Otokage as he spoke. Something bothered Hinata about this. Why would Orochimaru want Sasuke-san anyway? Orochimaru wants Sasuke for his bloodline limit, then he's supposed to attack Konoha once he's accomplished that. What to him matter than anything else was the fact that Sasuke had gone to the Snake Sennin willingly. Do you think that Tsunade-sama set our deadline at 3 years because she wants us ready to fight the Sound Nin when they attack us? It was hard for her to understand why anyone could hate their home village so much. I don't know, but I worry about all the other cells. Most of them have never fought Sound Nin before, and they might try and kill off any cell that leaves the village regardless of who their sensei is. Naruto showed a rare moment of insight with this statement. Hinata had already been worrying about the welfare of her friends. Now, however, she had even more to worry about with this apparent threat of the Sound. I can only hope everyone will be okay with all that's going on. Naruto suddenly lifted his gaze from the fire. Hey Hinata, there's no way that any of our friends would let themselves loose to any stupid Sound Nin, right? In true Naruto style, he did his best to uplift the mood. Hinata gave a small chuckle as she felt the pressure from their earlier conversation melt away. You're right, of course, Naruto-kun. She felt herself relaxing a bit now. A silence began to stretch between them. It seems like neither one of them knew exactly how to keep the conversation going. Naruto had been busy trying to stoke the fire with what was available when suddenly dawned on him. Hey Hinata, I never thought that I'd be able to talk to you this easily. You used to always look away when I noticed you, and you were always hiding behind walls and such. I always thought that you pretty weird because you were always hiding. Considering how you always acted, I never thought you could be this easygoing. You haven't even stuttered once. Naruto once again looked back at Hinata, this time with a stupid grin. What he said hit home like a bolt of lightning. He was right, now that she thought about it. She had just started talking with Naruto, and without realizing it she had carried on a conversation more easily with him than she had with anyone else before. Now that it was pointed out, she couldn't help but become more conscious of it. Why, you're right, Naruto-kun. I didn't even think about it. She was trying hard to recapture the mood that let her be so easygoing before, but found herself failing. I don't have any confidence when I'm talking to people in IU. She was finding it to be very awkward, talking about her introversion. Naruto noticed he hit on a sore subject and quickly tried to make amends. Sorry Hinata, I didn't mean to pry. You can just forget I said anything. He waved his arms in front of him as if trying to erase his prior question. It's just that I'm not ready to talk about that right now. She ran a hand through her black hair, trying to get rid of the tension she was feeling. It's okay, Hinata. I may have thought you were really weird at first, but now that I've talked with you a bit I can see that you're actually kinda nice. If you have something you want to talk about, then I'm all ears. Neji had told him that asking about the Hyuga might get her to converse, but he had started talking with her without even realizing how easy it could be. Thank you, Naruto-kun. The boy that was sitting not but a few feet away from her would probably be the hardest one to talk to about the subject of her shyness. He was always so confident in everything he did, and she felt that she was lacking, considering that she said she was going to change herself for the better. To tell him that she gained strength from his confidence, and just the act of talking to him was like a rush, would be too embarrassing to reveal. Naruto stood up and stretched his arms out wide. It's getting late. If we stay up too long we'll be useless if we want to do some training tomorrow on top of all that walking, right? Talking with you was really fun, yet I don't want to overdo it. Hinata stayed where she was sitting as Naruto began walking in the direction Lee had gone in earlier. At first she was just going to let him go with a good night, but she thought there was something more important she could say. Naruto-kun, the time comes I want bring Sasuke-san back with you, to Konoha and to all of his friends. A strange look passed over Naruto's face for a brief moment. That means a lot, Hinata, thank you. Without even thinking about it, his expression turned into one of a beaming smile. That smile he gave her was perhaps the warmest and friendliest ones she had ever seen before. Thank you, Naruto-kun. He was glad that her face was already flushed from the proximity of the fire, or she could have died from embarrassment if he had seen her intense blush. In the confusion of his simple statement, she had almost forgot to wish him a good night. Sleep well, Naruto-kun. In response he gave a small wave. You too, Hinata. This time he managed to leave the fire site without any more interruptions. Escaped his lips as he made his way along the night-cloaked ground. Once Naruto had made it to the tent he shared with Lee and the noises associated with such activity died down, Hinata began to put out the fire. She quickly threw some dirt onto the already dying fire, then waited to see if all the embers had been put out. Once she was satisfied the deed was done, she proceeded to her own tent. After a while the 3 Cell 15 members had fallen asleep. The only one left still awake was a sneaky old man right in their midst. He'd listened to their entire conversation and he was running through it again in his mind. In truth, he'd had plenty of time to devise a feasible training regime for them by now. After listening to their mutinous objections to his competency, he joked with himself that he might just forget the whole thing. The thing that had most caught his interest was the conversation Hinata and Naruto had between themselves. Naruto apparently still had the death wish of a plan to save his friend. He had a feeling he'd had to watch that for any interesting developments between the boy and girl, though. He found himself snickering wickedly even now as he attempted to fall asleep. Cell 15 was well on its way by the time the sun had traversed a good portion of the morning sky. As the 3 Genins and 1 Sannin trudged down the road, the sound of countless singing birds kept them company. The area of fire country they were in now couldn't really be called a forest anymore, yet there were still a significant amount of trees dotting the landscape. Lee, being the first one to have actually fallen asleep, was also the first one to wake up. Before even the rambunctious Naruto had woken up, he had prepared breakfast. Whatever the stamina meal he had made wasn't sitting well with Naruto and Hinata's stomachs. On the other hand, Jiraiya and Lee looked just peachy after eating those omelets. Oi, how many more days was it till we reach Aki, whatever it's called? Yuto asked this as he attempted to look at the map currently in Hinata's hands. The girl in question had pulled out a map of Fire Country out a while back and had been studying it. Judging by where we are, I'd say we could reach Akirahara by nightfall at this pace. See, just like I told you, Jiraiya peeked up from up ahead. Naruto's face scrunched up in annoyance. Yeah. Hinata suddenly brought the map closer to her face. This map says there's a small village about 30 minutes away from here. She placed a finger in front of a small dot on the map so everyone could see what she indicated. Jiraiya leaned in to see exactly which village she was talking about. When he realized which village it was, he got an idea. These brats wanted training, and this village would give him the perfect thing to train them. Hinata continued to show Naruto different areas on the map when Lee lost interest and turned to their sensei. Since last night the two had unconsciously connected in a way that neither one of them realized yet. Jiraiya-sensei, what sort of training were you going to be giving us today? Lee had brought up the subject before even Naruto could. This surprised Jiraiya as much as anything else could. Well, I think that I'll stop in at this village coming up for some supplies for your exercises I have planned. There's some things there I could use for some good lessons. At this, Naruto broke his concentration on the map and jumped in, leaving Hinata holding the map. So you are finally going to start teaching us stuff, huh? Naruto grinned widely at the thought. Finally getting the training he had been promised months ago. Hinata quickly folded up her map and placed it back in her bag. She was a little miffed that Naruto so quickly moved on from what she had been talking about. But she had to admit that this grabbed her curiosity too. What things are you going to pick up, Jiraiya-san? She asked innocently. He grinned and wagged a finger at her. You'll just have to wait and see now, won't you? Lee pumped his fists into the air. I can't wait to finally begin our training. He looked like a child in a candy store. If there was anyone who liked to training more than Naruto, it might just be Lee. Jiraiya just simply patted the boy on the shoulder. You won't have to wait much longer. We're coming up on the village right now. He pointed to an OUT of the way dirt road leading away from the main road they were on. I'm pretty well known in this particular village, so I'm going to duck in there right quick and pick up some things, and I'll be back in about an hour. The three stopped short of the fork in the road and waited for the older man to start on his way. He looked them over with a critical eye. You guys can wait right here for me, and I'll be right back. Hey, why can't we come, Ero-senin? Are you going to be doing some of your research? Naruto looked at their sensei with a condescending glare. The accused man let out a shout of protest. Don't always expect the worst of me, you brat. I said what I'm going to do and I'm going to do it, but it's not exactly kid safe if you know what I mean. The blush on his face was indicative enough of his truthfulness on the matter. Naruto put his hands behind his head, shooting the embarrassed man a sidelong glance. Right, everywhere you go you always have the best intentions. I believe that. Hinata only had a small thing to add to that, research. She didn't like the way Naruto-kun was implying the word. Are you going to write a book, Jiraiya-sensei? Lee hadn't CKED up on the context of the conversation yet. Naruto giggled conspiratorially in response to the question. I guess since we're being forced to wait here I can tell you all about Ero-senin's style of research. Jiraiya saw that he had gotten himself into a situation. He couldn't very well take these kids to this particular village, but he didn't want Naruto telling incriminating stories about him. He resolved to just pay back Naruto in kind later. Whatever you want, I'll be back soon. He turned around and quickly made his way down the dirt path in a huff. This left cell 15 on the N road with only the various trees and buzzing insects for company. Naruto and Lee watched the older man go as Hinata started walking towards the closest tree. After a few moments the two boys turned and went to join her. All they could do now was wait for Jiraiya to come back. On a grassy hill only slightly over 100 yards away, three figures waited watching the exchange. The only one out of the three that was actually standing had a very passive expression on her face. This is it, we begin now, she intoned monotonously. One of the kneeling figures stood up to join his companion. "Oh, I can't wait, sis. If this is going to be fun as Master said it will be, then I might just be able to get into this." The last member of the group stood up. "Shut up, ya crazy sicko. You can just keep in. Why of your weird experimentin' to yourself this time? Stop your needless chatter." The first speaker raised a hand slowly and then snapped her fingers. "Now." With this, the three people on the hill performed the seals for the Shunshin Jutsu at rapid speeds. In a flash they were gone, teleporting straight to their intended prey. Curse of battle. Only a few minutes ago Jiraiya had left Cell 15-0 and the side of the road while he visited an out-of-the-way village for some training supplies. Hinata had propped herself against the nearest tree while Naruto and Lee remained standing nearby. For now, they were just taking in the pre-noon atmosphere, not even bothering to strike up a conversation yet. The three of them were pretty content with just enjoying the silence for now. This oblivious air held them completely unawares when very suddenly they found themselves to be no longer alone. Without any warning, three unannounced people appeared between the three genins. Completely on reflex, Naruto and Lee jumped away and immediately set themselves to battle-ready stances, not even comprehending what had happened yet. When the emergence of the three hostile-looking ninja finally registered, their thoughts simultaneously went to Hinata. Thankfully she had also immediately scattered from close proximity to the strangers. She kicked off from the ground and jumped back as far as she could in that single leap. Hinata, Lee, and Naruto each stood facing one of the three intruders. The six of them stood there, no one apparently wanting to make the first move. Naruto stood facing a rather beepy-looking girl. Her suntanned face had a simple smile plastered on it like that of a kid in a candy store. Her dark red hair was done up in a simple braid that reached to her waist, and her clear emerald eyes reflected the same easygoing attitude her lips did. She had quite an odd outfit. She wore a matching pair of black skin-tight shorts and sleeveless midriff top over her feminine figure. Over her top she wore a padded purple vest embroidered in a pattern of circles done in silver. Wrapped around her waist was a darker purple long skirt with wide slits up the sides. Up high on her right GH was tied her silver-clothed sound forehead protector. The front of her skirt had an odd take on the hidden sounds symbol, also done in silver, taking up most of the material. Her forearms were set in simple black bracers which extended to cover the backs of her hands, complete with finger loops. The final piece of her outfit was matching in a pair of black shin guards that attached seamlessly to her black sandals. What caught his attention more than anything else was some kind of odd weapon roughly in the shape of an oval that hung low on her back, held in place by a leather harness of some kind. She stood with her legs slightly spread out and one arm resting over her weapon as if she would use it at the slightest provocation. Hinata stood squared off against a very deranged-looking boy. The only real indication of his disposition was his smile, since his wild brown hair completely hid his eyes. It wasn't just the homicidal, full-toothed grin that made him seem this way, she realized. It was something about the aura he exuded itself that had her uneasy. He wore a baggy gray hoodie with a sound forehead protector wrapped around his waist like a belt. She had a hard time telling what kind of pants he was wearing beyond the black color. His pants were covered in all different kinds of pouches and bags of every shape and size she had ever seen them come in. The last thing she old note about him that instead of wearing the standard ninja sandals he sported a pair of brown combat boots. This boy stood in a similar fashion as his first companion, but he kept his hands in the pocket of his hoodie. The last member of the invading group stood facing Lee calmly. This girl had a completely different air about her than the other two. She was the only one to actually wear her forehead protector on her forehead. Her blonde hair came down in short bangs on either side of the protector and long down the back, only going as far as her shoulders. Her plain hazel eyes shone with no discernible emotion and her mouth gave nothing away. She was completely unlike the others in their open display of emotion. She had a swath of bandages wrapped over the slight swell of her chest, and that was a simple green cotton shrug decorated her shoulders. Her arms and stomach were defined by well-toned muscles that spoke of an active and rigorous physical lifestyle. Her hands were covered by green fingerless gloves that had metal plates that segmented and extend to the first joints of her fingers in a shape of metal knuckles. Not in keeping with the rest of her outfit, loose red hakam A pants covered her legs and even concealed whatever it was she wore on her feet. She stood straight and tall in contrast to her two companions. For a while these 6 ninjas continued their standoff. It was as if the gods of everything cliché were taking special interest into this situation. A strong gust of wind complete with leaves blew around everyone, only punctuating the tenseness of the moment. This seemed like it could go on for quite a while until eventually the one facing Lee spoke up. "We have been sent here by the honored Orochimaru-sama to kill you 3. Let's get to better know your killers. My name is Arashihara. This idiot over here is Kari and this other idiot is Katsu." She indicated first the other girl and then the crazy-looking boy. Both of the speaker's allies spoke, up with fake indignation at being called such names. "Don't make me hurt ya," the one called Kari spoke up. "You wouldn't be talking so big if I had been made the captain of this mission, you understand," the one called Katsu chimed in. The corner of Arashihara's mouth peaked in what one would call a smile unless you saw that no emotion crept into her eyes. "That's how it is. Oh crap," was the only thing Naruto could think to say. Hinata and Lee simply stood their ground looking for any threatening moves that could be made against them. In unison the 3 sound nin closed the gap between them and the leaf nin they were matched against. Before either of the Cell 15 ninja could react, their right hands were seized and pressed into an unfamiliar hand seal by their opponent's right hand. He 6 ninja instantly disappeared from the roadside upon the completion of the advanced Shunshin Jutsu. Naruto and Kari reappeared in a wide clearing that looked like it wasn't anywhere near where they had been before. Surrounded by honeylocust trees. Before Naruto could even get his bearings, Kari struck out with her free left hand at the confused boy's chest. This staggered Naruto off guard and sent him flying back. He landed as gracefully as possible, immediately drawing a kunai and holding it out in front of him. The sound nin took this chance to grab the weapon she had strapped behind her back and pulled it out with a quick and practiced pull. The second the weapon left the harness, the smug ninja gave a hard flick of her wrist. The weapon in her hand suddenly transformed with that simple flick. It took Naruto a second to realize what it must be because it didn't look anything like a traditional boomerang. The first thing that caught his eye was the size, in this extended length. It was almost as long as the girl was tall. The second thing he noticed was it was much more angular than curved like he was used to seeing boomerangs. Both ends of the boomerang had circular holes, cut into the inside lined with leather grips. The entire edge of the switchblade boomerang was lined with a sharp edge that gleamed with a dangerous light in the morning sun. He could see that the mechanism that joined the 2 wings was pretty complicated if it could snap the weapon into a seamless hole from 2 side-by-side halves. The girl grinned wickedly as she took pleasure in Naruto's astonishment at her weapon. "How do y'all like ma baby, Nidhogg cutie? I think you and him are gonna make fast friends, right? Cutie." Naruto quickly weighed his options. He had no idea where this crazy Kai CK had teleported them to, and she didn't exactly look like she wanted to be friends, and he seriously doubted any amount of kunai would slow down that huge boomerang. His options looked pretty bleak at the moment. Hinata had been pressed into a similar situation. She had fared slightly better against her captor than Naruto had, at least. The second she reappeared in a loose grove of apple tree, her free hand instinctively whipped up and delivered 5 across Katsu's face. The recipient of her desperate attack reeled before angrily shoving her away. Hinata skidded across a small patch of dirt before regaining her balance by digging her heels into the firmament. Katsu was left rubbing his face while shooting her a death glare from behind his concealing head of hair. "You bitch, if you want to die that badly then maybe I won't take my time killing you like was the plan." With this declaration he reached into 2 pouches on his pants and pulled out a handful of shurikens and smoke bombs. She was completely unprepared for this, but Hinata steeled herself for combat regardless. She placed both her left hand and foot forward, and tucked her right hand and foot closer to her body. Finally Hinata turned both her palms forward, completing the basic Hyuga Juken stance. She was in a situation she had never been in before, just her and her opponent. She felt fear start to rise from deep within her, but stubbornly opposed it by thinking of what Naruto would say to her in this situation that would boost her spirits. As a final act to dispel her fears she breathed deeply and tried to let out all her negative emotions in one breath. This was one time where she couldn't afford to doubt herself or her abilities. She set herself to win, to defeat this opponent and finally prove to herself that she was worthy of Naruto's praise. Lee, having trained his body far harder than his two companions, instinctively struck out before he and his enemy had even fully reappeared. His bow, Dai had finally healed back to its fullest extent after months of training it and feeding it nasty medicines. It was like the incident with Gaara's Sabaku Q had never happened. This was readily EV'd. NT in how fast his fist clenched and launched at Arashihara's midsection. The amount of speed and muscle power he put into this punch simply wasn't available to him a few months ago during that failed mission. Considering this, he was very surprised when he felt his fist connect not with his opponent's chest, but with her other hand. The girl had caught his fist that could shatter bones with a simple outstretched palm. Something he had never thought possible. What was even odder was that he didn't feel any impact at all. With a patient calm, her hand slowly encircled his fist and she began to squeeze. Lee now found himself with both of his hands preoccupied with those of the cool-tempered girl. He tried to press his considerable strength against hers but found no matter how much he tried, her relaxed posture did not yield. As Lee began to wonder if he could even call this altercation a stalemate, Arashihara suddenly loosened her grip. A blue flash of chakra pulsed from her hands and suddenly Lee found himself sailing very quickly away from her. It felt like he had wrapped his hands around a bolt of lightning. Before he crashed into any trees with his path through the air, he put a series of flips that helped slow him down. Even though he had just been put through a tremendous shock, he recovered his wits well enough. He landed ready with his hand stretched towards his assaulter and his legs spread wide. The girl stood her ground and did not move an inch. Lee took this opportunity to examine his options. There was an enemy before him with unknown strength, and he had no idea where his companions were. Do not think of leaving. You will die here. That is all you have to worry about. The oddly clad girl still did not move, but Lee had a feeling from their quick exchange that she could probably match speed with him. He had a very bad feeling about this girl. Neither Naruto nor Carry made a move against the other for many moments. Naruto felt like his arms would cramp if held any tighter of a grip on his kunai. Carry on the other hand didn't seem to be bothered by the weight of her Nidhogg. She demonstrated this ease by suddenly hefting her weapon up and set it to spinning. Her hand gliding along the grip as it spun in its orbit. The orange-clad boy knew what must be coming, so he wasted no time in throwing his kunai at her. All he could hope for was just a small distraction at this point from that puny weapon. The second the kunai had left his hand, he put his fingers in the cross-hand seal in preparation for his specialty, Kage Bunshin. To her credit, Carry flicked her free hand out and caught the flying kunai with one finger. She grinned at this reckless attack on her. It seemed like she shared something in common with this cute boy. As she led the kunai on her finger, her arm pulled back, the boomerang still spinning. "Let's go," she yelled as she pulled her arm forward and let loose the ridiculously large weapon. At that same moment Naruto countered with his own Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The area surrounding him exploded in a gaggle of man-sized puffs of smoke as he summoned over 24 physical replicas of himself. Before Naruto had traveled very far from her grip, she slung the kunai that had been spinning in her hand straight at the spot where the original Naruto was standing. Naruto managed to sidestep the kunai, but he clone behind him was hit dead center, sending up a poof of smoke as it disappeared. Nidhogg followed only a split second behind the kunai. He had no chance of dodging the spinning death in time. In the span of only a couple seconds, the boomerang had traversed the gap between foes. Even as he did his best to position himself to dodge it, he knew it was too late. Luckily for him though, through the intangible connection he shared with his clones, the nearest one grabbed his leg and pulled him down. As Naruto was jerked onto his stomach, he caught the demise of his clone on Nidhogg's blade out of the corner of his eye. It continued to whirl past and sliced through two more unsuspecting clones before it hit the tree line. The nearest honeylocust tree was neatly sliced through at the base. The snapping sound of the blade tearing through the giant tree blasted the clearing like a mountain splitting in two. Naruto scrambled back onto his feet in preparation for Carry's next attack. What he was expecting wasn't what he got. The girl just stood there with her hands on hips, and a smirk on her lips. As he puzzled why she was so calm, it came to him, boomerangs always came back. Naruto barely managed to duck down before a second deafening crack signaled the return of Nidhogg through the still falling tree. When the sound of whirling death passed only inches above him, he got the feeling he just underwent an scheduled haircut. Naruto looked up in time to see Carrie reach out, and with some superhuman sense of timing, seized one of the grips of her weapon. The force of catching such a raw, piddly spinning weapon spun her around once before she brought the opposite edge into the ground, stopping her movement. The three hit the ground with an earth-shaking whump. Naruto couldn't let her let that blade be loosed again. He crossed his fingers in front of him once again. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With this yell, close to 100 shadow clones burst forth all around the sound nin. Oh my, aren't ya one-trick pony? Her gaze never stopped wandering from clone to clone. Ah, shut it. Naruto now had confidence he could press an attack. No matter how many clones he had, he'd learned from many past battles that hanging back while letting his clones attack never seemed to work. In unison, he and all his considerable amount of replications launched themselves at Carrie. Carrie let out a barking laugh. It seems she indeed had found someone even more impulsive than herself. She let the leaping multitudes of Naruto sail a little bit closer to her before acting. She left her weapon stuck in the ground as she ran through a rapid series of hand seals. Bird, boar, rabbit, ram, boar, and finally dragon. Not letting her build up chakra to dissipate, she quickly took up Nidhogg again and wasted no time sending it into a blinding spin above her head. Futon. She let the blade spin just a little bit faster before continuing, great howling cyclone. The wind jutsu kicked up a raging whirlwind around Carrie, aided by the spinning of her boomerang. The jutsu spiraled upward, ripping up the ground around her at the distance of 3 yards. A wall of attacking clone met the wall of spinning wind with disastrous results. The clones that had been closest to her were destroyed first, and then the ones farther away began to be destroyed. Carrie decided that it was a good time to stop. Release, she cried out. The cyclone spinning around her expanded 10 times over in an instant, destroying all the remaining clones and sending the real Naruto flying headlong away from her. She stopped the spinning of Nidhogg by simply letting it run itself into the ground at an angle, the cyclone disappearing at the same time. The impact against the cyclone jutsu ripped the front of Naruto's jacket to shreds and sent him flying away faster than he would have thought possible. Almost on instinct, his hands once again formed the seal for the Kage Bunshin. He barely managed to choke out the name of the jutsu. And only 6 clones appeared this time. They appeared in a line behind him, each one trying to slow his flight as much as possible. He slammed through each one violently before finally the last one caught him. Slamming against a tree, Carrie pressed her advantage gladly. She ripped Nidhogg from the ground and charged recklessly at her adversary. Halfway to the still daze Naruto, she whipped out her weapon out to her side. This motion caused the giant boomerang's mechanisms to click and ratchet. The quick motion brought the device loose and quickly snapped it back into a 6-foot-long straight-edged blade. Naruto shook his head violently in an attempt to gain his faculties back. Even with all those clones slowing him down, that blow against the tree still hurt. His hand gravitated to his chest where the tatters of his favorite jacket now decorated. He suddenly remembered that his enemy was still here and unharmed. The extended Nidhogg chopped deep into the bark of the tree where his head had been a split second before. He had seen his incoming doom just quickly enough to dodge underneath. When Carrie braced her feet apart to add stability to her sweeping move, she had given Naruto just enough room to roll through. He kicked off the second he completed his roll, creating a distance between them. He twisted midair with a fresh batch of kunai in his hand, flinging them without waiting for a good view of her position. She anticipated the attack and pushed away from her weapon. She made the mistake of trying to wrench free her weapon regardless. This hesitation cost her dearly. The first 2 kunai flew wide on either side of her, but the third pierced her hesitating hand clean through. She hopped away from her weapon, turning away from Naruto as she grasped the damaged hand close to her. This gave Naruto sole use of the advantage, which he now would gladly press. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. One more time the area around Naruto and Carrie was filled with his clones. This time he had a plan. A plan like this always came easily to the mind of a trickster. Carrie heard the name of that infernal jutsu called again, and this just further enraged her. With blood spewing from the vicious wound in her hand, she turned back around, letting out a furious yell. "Damn you, you stupid brat, for the love of..." She trailed off, blinded by her own pain. She saw how many clones she was facing and would have laughed if her hand wasn't sending waves of pain to her brain. There were only 7 Narutos arrayed around her. She prioritized the need to get back to Nidhogg first. As her luck would have it, only 2 clones stood between her and her weapon. She exploded into motion, first kicking and then punching with her free hand the 2 clones that stood in her way. Before any of the remaining Narutos could react, she had reached her weapon. No matter how cute he was, his death was assured now. With her healthy hand she gave a muscle-straining wrench on Nidhogg. She flicked her wrist and the mechanism ratcheted it back into its boomerang shape. "That was it, ya you bastard." As she beeped back the giant boomerang, she finally felt that something was wrong. The balance of the blade was off somehow. It felt like, "I've got you no." All of a sudden her Nidhogg burst in a puff of smoke, revealing that she was actually holding Naruto by the wrist. "Oh, she," was all she managed to get out before Naruto's free hand came crashing into the side of her face. "You," Naruto yelled. The punch sent her reeling into the next clone, which prompt ducked L. Ow and delivered a kick that sent her sailing up into the air. Zoo. Another clone leapt up on the shoulders of the last one and rocketed after Carrie, delivering a kick to her side which sent her spinning. Carrie's body was next rocked by a clone that had positioned itself already in the air. It spun and brought a foot down on her midsection. Her body rocketed back to the ground. The final Naruto, the real one, was waiting below. He brought his arm up to meet Carrie's body and caught her square in the back. The noise of her bones creaking against the strain was incredibly audible. Advanced. His muscles strained not to let her body continue into the ground. For the final attack he hopped off the ground and spun, bringing his heel to bear once again onto her midsection. Combo. He yelled out with triumph. His heel slammed her into the ground and pinned her there. Naruto breathed raggedly, the strain of this combat starting to take its toll. The remaining clones disappeared in their puffs of smoke. The only clone that hadn't attacked disappeared, leaving the real Nidhogg to fall onto a patch of dirt. The battle-weary boy slowly started to step back, confident it was now over. Carrie tried desperately to beep in some air as it felt like her lungs had been crushed by his dizzying attack. When she thought that finally her lungs would fail her, they began to slowly beep in air again. After many moments of trying to regain regularity in her breathing, she finally mustered the energy to speak. "Kage Bunshin, Henge, and Kawarimi, damn it, you," each word caused her great deals of pain. "That's what you get for messing with me." Naruto was starting to feel the fatigue more and more as the adrenaline flooded from his system. He squinted against the blinding sun to look coldly at his fallen opponent. "You're dead, sure now." She could feel the chakra flowing through her. She no longer had a choice but to use that jutsu. This is what it meant to be a ninja under Orochimaru. She slowly started to right herself into a standing position as the chakra gave her back her bodily functions in full. Naruto had felt this chakra before. As he felt it growing, he tried hard to think of where he had felt it before. It continued to grow, coming from the fallen girl, and it eventually came to him. He knew now where he had felt this chakra before. Crap. Hinata eyed the weapons Katsu kept in between his fingers. There was no doubt that he was a long-range specialist. She would have to think of a way to keep herself within close range of him if there was to be any chance of success for her. "You are Hyuga Hinata, fallen heir to your house. Unable to manage your bloodline, you can barely perform Juken right. Close quarters combat is all you have, and that would definitely not be called a specialty for you, right?" He never lost that condensing smirk through his whole speech. Hinata heard these words, but for the first time in her life chose to ignore such things. "You want to kill me, so come and do it." She had to do everything she could to goad him into coming at her in close combat. "Nice try, but no matter how weak you are, it would only take one good strike from your hand to kill me." Katsu palmed the shurikens in his right hand to wag a finger at her, then replaced the shurikens back in their positions amongst his fingers. Hinata had to Are all her resolve so she wouldn't give anything away to the crazy boy. This is a test, I will prove that I can be a good ninja or die trying. I'm ready. She was, if she failed here it would be all over for her regardless if someone came to save her or not. Then it's time for you to die. His left hand came up first, slinging the smoke bombs towards her. She didn't know what techniques to expect from him. But bad aim had not been one of them. The smoke bombs detonated at various spots around her in the grove. She instantly steeled her stance, ready for anything else. He made no other move after this. He simply crouched lower to the ground and waited for the effects of his special smoke bombs to take their effect. He had an entire arsenal of every imaginable ninja tool from which to draw from back in Otogakur. But he only had so many pockets. He didn't believe in compartment scrolls either. He brought only what he thought would be able to defeat a Hyuga. I know you're just going to. Oh, love my special smoke bombs, that grin once again splitting his face. The resolved girl kept her stance regardless of her opponent's inability to make a move, ready for anything. The smoke bombs he had thrown minutes earlier still had large orbs of coiling black smoke exuding from their positions. She had a growing feeling of dread about those things. Katsu looked the girl over carefully. But O-san had informed him this girl was weak, easy pickings. What he saw before him was a steely-eyed girl who showed no signs of any weakness. Maybe this was a different person. It didn't matter, she was going to die the same. It was time to blind the Hyuga. Hinata began concentrating chakra on her eyes. In the past I was so weak I couldn't even use my Byakugan without the use of hand seals. Old feel the physical strain on the area around her eyes grow. Neji-ne-san used to be a shadow looming over any small achievement I ever made. Her vision started to clear, it began to change in perception. I always believed that the clan's blessings were beyond me. The veins around her eyes began to bulge out. Things are different now, I found someone that believes I can do things when even I can't. A second iris began forming within her milky white orbs. Because someone believed in me I have found that I can be strong. Her hands and legs straightened out, her body stretched to its full height. If just for this day alone I can show strength, then I'll show that strength, I'll prove I can pull my own weight. Byakugan, she nearly screamed out. She had finally activated her bloodline without the use of hand seals. Whatever, Katsu decided he had had enough of this upstart girl. He threw the shurikens he had been keeping in his right hand straight at her. As the shurikens came in on her left side, she dodged easily to her right. For a second he had let fear spark through his thoughts. If she had used one of those other Hyuga skills he had heard of to deflect his projectiles he would have been in big trouble. His fear quickly abated when he saw her dodge into one of the smoke orbs. There was no reason to fear anymore. She had fallen right into his trap. As much confidence as she generated in herself, as much as she had trained herself to just activate her Byakugan, there was no way she could use Kaden. Her only option was to dodge, and it wasn't until her feet already landed back on the ground that she realized her mistake. When she had activated her Byakugan she lost true perception of the world like her normal eyesight afforded her and gained something far more in return. She hadn't thought a smoke cloud would have impeded her vision at all, for nothing could block the penetrating sight of her bloodline limit. She was wrong. She could feel the oily smoke on her skin. But that wasn't what first alerted her to her sudden change in climate. The second she had entered the smoke orb her newly obtained vision was instantly cut off. Panic entered into her sense of resolve. She could feel her eyes still active, so she had to conclude that it was the smoke she was in that affected her so. It may be that while you're in that little fun house of yours I won't be able to see you. But I'm willing to guess that you can't see me either, right? He let a long cackle escape his lips at thought of his trap working so flawlessly. All Hinata had to do was leave this orb of darkness and then she'd be able to strike her enemy down. She charged forward and prepared for her sight to return, and with it her advantage. The exact moment she regained her vision she saw her mistake. The sound nin came at her slashing with a long-bladed kunai. Her left hand came up short in an instinctive block. Her hand slapped against his wrist and she immediately pushed as much chakra as possible into his arm. As her chakra did its damage he jerked his hand back, dragging his kunai across her shoulder. Their wounds caused both of them to jump back from each other. Hinata retreated back into the orb of smoke, immediately moving as quietly as she could to what she could only hope what was still the rightmost inside boundary of her prison. The sounds of Katsu's curses led her now where he was in relation to her for the moment. That damn girl had certainly ruined his perfect plan. Her timing in coming out of his smoke orb couldn't have been worse for him. She had certainly demonstrated how dangerous she could be. His wrist ached like it was in a viciously tight clamp, and this pain made him mutter curses, unwillingly giving away his own position. He quickly forced himself to forget his pain and regain his composure. This fight was very fast, turning from a leisurely win to a major annoyance. He reached into his largest pouch and pulled out one of his more favorite devices, the bola. He felt along the line of cord until he found the midpoint, and raised his arm over a head and began twirling the weighted. He needed to buy time for his other wrist to recover. Don't get beepy just because of that now. You're being beepy enough for the both of us, so don't worry. Hinata had never been one for comebacks, but this one had just come to her. She picked up on the sound of something being whirling through the air, and prepared herself for the worst, training her ears to listen for the slightest change. Despite her mind urging caution, she readied herself to start moving as quickly as possible. This stalemate they were in prevented her from the full force of his long-distance attacks, and he from her short-distance attacks. He may like to play it safe, but he resolved that she wouldn't be able to afford such leisure much longer. She leapt to the side, out of the smoke orb, and made a dash straight at Katsu. He had anticipated this and waited for her to make the first move. He flung the bola low, aiming for her legs. The spinning weapon missed entirely as she jumped over it. He had also counted on this. In the moments between when he sent the bola to spinning and when Hinata began her attack, he had managed to get his injured hand to pull out a small handful of powder from a small compartment at his waist. He blew the sapphire-colored dust within the pouch into Hinata's path. She stopped her charge as her vision picked up the dust cloud wreathed in some weird chakra. Instantly deciding to ignore it, she went straight through that cloud no matter what threat it could pose. Katsu was too astounded at her abandon to throw up a decent defense in time. The Hyuga threw out both her palms and caught him square in the chest. Any outside observer would have been able to see the wave of chakra that pulsed out of Katsu's back as Hinata's strike hit home. He staggered back instantly, beginning to hack up blood. Hinata didn't press the attack, and this gave the sound nin time enough to weakly jump into one of the far smoke orbs. Unsurprisingly, she found that not only could she not see out of the orbs, she couldn't see into the orbs either. This was quickly becoming a very troublesome battle. She now had time to wonder if running through that chakra-charged dust cloud had been a good idea. Katsu's mind was on a completely different path at this point. Rage consumed his mind, and a mist of battle fury was descending on his consciousness. I want to see her dead at my feet. I want to rip her guts out. I'm going to annihilate her. Now was the perfect time to try out some new jutsus. He set about concentrating all his chakra reserves at the nape of his neck. He was going to use the gift Orochimaru had given him to destroy this increasingly dangerous girl. He felt it now. Oh, the power! Oh, the ecstasy! At this point his mind began to cloud over as the forbidden jutsu began achieving the desired results. The best part of this situation was that she had no idea what was going on within his smoke orb, allowing him all the time he needed to complete the jutsu. Arashihara hadn't budged an inch from her original position in all the times Lee had charged into attack. Every time he struck out with hand or foot, she would block with just one of her hands, using that weird chakra to nullify his attack. It seemed to him like taijutsu was not the most effective method against her. I am giving you 5 more minutes before I kill you, she intoned in that same monotonous voice. By the leaf, it seems I'm always matched against those with an ultimate defense. Guy-sensei, will I ever be able to prove that I can win with taijutsu alone? He gave up in attacking her in the fashion which had proven ineffective already, and decided he needed a plan. He knew that she was at least as fast as he himself was, and no matter how much force he put behind an attack, she simply nullified it with that infernal chakra. How do you like my force cancel? I can stop anything with a kinetic force with ease. It is my bloodline limit. It does very well against taijutsu users. You have 3 minutes. Arashihara's voice showed no sense of pride, just statements of fact. Lee started at this revelation. A bloodline, she's a genius then. He had sworn that he could beat a genius with hard work. From his first days as a genin this had been a goal of his. He remembered all the times he had failed against geniuses, and all the training he put himself through because of it. Neji, Gaara, Kimimaro, I've failed against them trying to prove my Nindo. Today wouldn't be the day to lose yet again. The fire of youth can make anything possible. I won't lose to you today, I will prove that I can win with taijutsu alone. Lee came down on one knee immediately pulling down his orange socks. He then unclasped the training weights wrapped around his shins. These were different than the ones he had used during the Chunin exam. The words, youth, and passion, were emblazoned on alternating weight blocks instead of guts, as had been in the past. Lee slowly stood back up, bringing one weight in each hand up with him. In truth these things were harder to lift than the previous weights, 2 times heavier to be exact. He held them stretched out at his sides waiting for his foe's reaction. The only reaction she gave was a raised eyebrow. She was more curious than awed by these weights. He was a little annoyed she hadn't been impressed. I'm beginning now, Lee cried out. Instead of dropping them down like he had done in the past he pulled back both arms. Putting as much strength into it as he could possibly muster he brought his arms forward and flung them as hard as possible at the smug girl. As expected she put forth both hands to intercept the weights. What he hadn't expected was that she dug in her heels and squared her shoulders when the weights hit her hands. The same blue flash exploded from her palms as before, but Lee noted that she was forced back just a little bit by the impact. He had no time to consider this marginal victory over her, he had to act quickly. With those weights removed he could move over 4 times as fast as before. He demonstrated this by suddenly disappearing from in front of her. He could now move fast enough to look like he simply disappeared to the untrained eye. She expected to be attacked from behind, and the second she recovered from the impact of Lee's weights she started to turn in that direction. The attack came from behind her as she turned. As fast as Lee had become her Han. D snaked in to block and nullify his attack. Lee in turn disappeared again. Arashihara's training meant she could anticipate any kind of attack at any time. She crouched down low and avoided a neck-snapping kick by only a hair's breadth. She dodged or force-cancelled another succession of over a dozen lightning fast kicks and punches before seizing an opportunity. After 3 attacks were made Lee would be slow in starting another set of triple attacks. After the last set ended she set her hands to a rapid series of hand seals. It was no longer time to stand idly by. Doden, sin of ruptured earth. She slammed her hands down on the ground just as Lee reappeared to deliver a kick to her head. Fortunately for her Lee had planted his other foot on the ground right next to her. Her jutsu activat, and the earth instantly began splitting and shaking violently. This centralized earthquake unbalanced Lee, but Arashihara didn't feel its effects at all. Her feet also used chakra cancel to stop her body from being negatively affected by the destruction of the earth all around them. It was time to use another aspect of her bloodline limit. She began absorbing the kinetic energy from the earthquake and funneled it to her hands. Lee was still busy being unbalanced by her jutsu, so she felt she had time to explain his plight. Not only can I cancel out kinetic energy but I can also absorb kinetic energy and use it as a weapon. She yelled over the crashing earth. She beeped both arms back and then rocketed them forward into his chest. The exact instant before her hands came into contact with his chest she released all the kinetic chakra from her hands at once. A huge explosion of chakra sent Rock Lee flying into the air. Arashihara wasted no time in pursuing him. She concentrated chakra and force from the now dissipating earthquake into her feet, then launched herself into the sky. She misjudged her speed relative to his and almost overshot him, but she grabbed the front of his outfit at the last second and brought him up to her altitude. Lee brought his head around just in time to see her fist smash into his face. Her fist skimmed off his face, allowing her to bring her elbow to bear against his temple. The double blow to his head dazed Lee, causing him respond even slower. She gave a few heavy slaps to the sides of his head before bringing both knees into his stomach one after the other. He gritted his teeth against the pain and brought his arms up to shield his face. Any and every thought had already left his mind as instinct took over. This, however, was not going to help him much. The girl continued unabated by smashing her knee into Lee's solar plexus. Oddly enough, Lee, instead of doubling over in pain, jerked back violently, forcing Arashihara to rip the hold she had on Lee's outfit. She didn't have time to react when he spun in the air, bringing his leg down on her shoulder. There had been no time to use her force cancel on the blow, so she received the full impact. The two embattled ninja fell back from a height of only 36 feet to land the same distance away from each other. The calm girl landed on both her feet, ignoring the ache in her shoulder. Lee, on the other hand, had barely managed to land on his feet, aided by one of his hands. From the one eye that was still open, he could see the ground before him blur with what he feared was double vision. After catching his breath, he brought his bruised face up to meet the piercing glare of his opponent. "You're going to pay for hitting me." She resisted the urge to reach up and rub her increasingly aching shoulder. Lee spit out some blood that had been gathering in his mouth. "I'm not done yet." He gritted his teeth, chasing away his faltering vision. Lee's speed had not decreased in the least as he disappeared once again. As the Sound Nin began to guess where he would come from this time, she was surprised that he appeared right before her. She glanced down in case she needed to react fast. This was when she noticed something curious. She had landed right next to the battered boy's weights, where they had landed from her deflection. He reached down and gripped the clasping straps of both weights. There was one significant difference besides just the added weight between these and his previous model. He had spent many nights sewing the weights together in just the right way, as to provide himself with a secret weapon. Strike. His hands flashed up, his wrists snapped, and the weights tore. They tore in such a way that the cloth that had held them side to side ripped until each weight block was end to end. He had only sewn the edges of the cloth with a second layer that would allow such a tear. The weight blocks arced up like whips towards Arashihara. She had to add, MIT, that it was quite an unorthodox weapon she was being attacked with, but it still made no difference. Her hands came down upon the makeshift whips and cancelled their kinetic force. The smug smile he allowed herself almost seemed to transfer seamlessly to Lee when she realized her mistake. The whips may have had their kinetics cancelled upon initial impact, but the remaining length still continued to whip around. The force of her striking the middle of their length caused the ends to arc back towards her. Before she could bring her hands up, both ends of the whips smashed into her shoulders. As she staggered back, the crack of her left shoulder let her know she was in serious trouble. Lee pressed his new advantage, the smile on his face disappearing under a look of concentration. He struck out first with his right, then his left hands, putting his whole body into the attacks. Arashihara learned from her past mistake and this time brought her whole arms into the block, catching both whips lengthwise along her arms and easily cancelling their kinetics. Before his whips had even struck her arms, he launched himself off the ground and put himself into a spin like a corkscrew, at the same time releasing the weights. His spinning feet slammed into her vulnerable chest, knocking her hard into the ground. She bounced once, and managed to get one hand underneath her. She pushed off, performing a flip and landing unsteadily back on her feet. Rock Lee had one last trick to try against her failing defenses. He put on one more burst of speed to once again appear in a flash before her. Without giving his feet time to touch the ground, he struck out with both fists. He had to resist the urge to cheer when she brought both palms to bear on his attack. Instead of letting their hands collide, he stopped his attack just a fraction too short of hitting her hands. He could actually feel her chakra attempt to stop the non-existent kinetics. He took this opportunity to unwrap his clenched fists to lock fingers with her. By this point he had figured out that she could only use her bloodline from her hands or feet, leaving him free to attack if those appendages were occupied. He pulled against her arms and used the strain between them to bring his feet into her chest. He didn't stop with just one solid attack. He proceeded to repeatedly landed kicks all over her torso. He landed over 2 kicks in this fashion before she started to falter and he lost his horizontal position. When he could no longer support either of their balance, he delivered a double kick to her solar plexus one more time. This last violent attack rocked her straight back into the air until she struck a tree over 9 yards away, splintering the bark behind her. He landed somewhat effortlessly on his 2 hands. He lowered himself closer to the ground before pushing off and putting himself through a series of acrobatic flips before landing solidly on both feet. Lee readied himself into a ready stance, not willing to bet his life on his combative abilities in the face of this extremely dangerous opponent. Pain and heat racked his body as he finally started to feel the effects of his intense combat. Cool air kicked up suddenly, sending shivers along his up and down him as it cooled the sweat on his body. He continued to watch her still body slumped against the tree for a long time before deciding this fight was over. "I'm sorry," was all he had to say. If he had waited only a few more moments, he would have seen a cloud of dust suddenly blow away from the silent body of Arashihara like a bubble of air had burst. Her eyes snapped open as her body began to crackle with a demonic chakra. After a few moments in this state, her body seemed to raise up as if being held up on strings like a marionette. Rock Lee felt the pressure wave of dirt wash over him, forcing him to turn around. Before him stood the resurrected body of his previously downed foe. "You will be sorry." Arashihara now had to contend with the ridiculous amount of chakra unspooling from within her body, rendering speech rather hard. Lee put himself back into the earlier battle stance one more time. "This is getting ridiculous. How much longer is this all going to take?" He paused, for the first time allowing himself to remember his companions. "I sure hope Naruto-kun and Hinata-san are alright." Jiraiya looked around. The bazaar he was strolling aimlessly through with a greedy eye. He sure did like this city. This city was actually the biggest center for gambling, mafioso, and other illegal things in all of Fire Country. It was the main reason why there wasn't much attention brought to it on maps or road signs. The lights of all the neon signs shone like gems in the morning light, and the sounds of many dubio as activities being carried out in the open was like a dull roar. The booth girls were gorgeous as always, making it hard for him to remember why he had come here. To his credit, he had already picked up a few essential items for his training regime he had planned. There was only a few more pieces left to buy, but who said his eyes couldn't shop as well? "I sure hope those crazy kids are finding something to do to keep busy." He chuckled to himself as a particularly voluptuous girl beckoned him to a stand selling fried squid. Naruto steeled himself for the worst as he felt the chakra from Kari grow. 3 months ago he had felt this same chakra from Sasuke during the fight at the waterfall. He knew it was Orochimaru's curse seal at work. As he watched Kari, he had to wonder what he was going to be able to do now. Would he have to use the Kyuubi again? That bastard fox, is he the only thing I can use against Orochimaru's freaks? He pulled out another kunai from his dwindling supply, not that he thought it would be much use at this point. As if to punctuate his fears, the curse seal finally showed itself. From the way it was growing, he had to guess the original mark was somewhere on her back. Unlike Sasuke's mark that looked like a bunch of small mutated blobs, this was distinctly different. Markings like vine tendrils coiled all over her body until every inch of her skin was covered in a forest of jet black vine markings. The curse-sealed girl brought her hands together. Only the seals for tiger and dragon flashed before she reached out her left hand. Nidhogg disappeared in a poof of smoke from where it lay and then reappeared in her outstretched hand. After that had been done, her gaze lifted to meet his. "Ya should've killed me the second I was on ground. Now you'll die so ya won't have to regret it." Hinata couldn't see what was going on within the smoke orb Katsu had staggered into. She had waited for minutes now for the enraged ninja to start a renewed attack on her. Just a few moments ago her vision had started to act up. The images her bloodline-enhanced eyes generated were faltering. The distance she could see and the chakra images she was receiving changed wildly by the second. She had deduced rather quickly that it must have been that chakra cloud she had stepped through that was doing this to her. She almost thought her eyes were truly starting to fail when she saw a monstrous force of chakra suddenly appear in front of her. She had to concentrate her eyes to see back into the normal spectrum to confirm what her Byakugan was telling her. To her dismay, her eyes had not been acting up when they showed her that monstrous chakra. Someone closely resembling Katsu stood before her. He had removed his hoodie, revealing only a fishnet shirt underneath. His body was covered in weird markings, all interconnected, in the shape of crescent moons. She had never seen the like before, and could only guess what they meant. The scariest thing of all to her was that he no longer showed signs of fatigue from her Juken strikes. Activated, was the only word he spoke. With this he jumped past her into the smoke orb still behind her. She spun around to face the orb, her stance becoming firm once again despite the growing pain in her head. For the first time since she had been teleported to this grove she felt like she might not make it. Lee had to figure that all of his last set of blows had landed perfectly on Arashihara, and none of them had been cancelled to his knowledge. So why is she standing? I don't even think I could have stood after that. Her skin began a transformation he had seen only once before. Kimamaro's skin had undergone the same change when they had fought those months ago. This curse seal looked different than the one that Bone Monster had used. Her body quickly became engulfed in a swarm of linked tattoos that closely resembled curving Z's. Before he could say or do anything, the sound Nin flexed her arms, and in some way caused them to start pulsing with a dull blue light. Arashihara was quite content with doing all the talking at this point. You have seen Orochimaru-sama's gift once before. It is unfortunate Kimamaro-san expired then. But I will not give you the time to summon an ally to aid you like he did. She extended her arms out towards him. Lee maintained his composure despite himself. At T.'s point he could only do as much as his body would allow him. The fires of youth give in to no one. To be continued, and thank you for watching.